See, he didn't wait until they were alone. He didn't pull her aside, didn't whisper, didn't give her even the smallest mercy of privacy. See, Edwin Rourke stopped the ceremony right there in front of every soul, and Red Willow pointed his finger at the woman's standing beside him in the dress she'd sewn with her own hands, and told the whole congregation that Clara Whitmore was a liar. See, a debt-ridden, desperate woman who had used him. The organ went silent. See, the flowers didn't move, and Clara stood there in white, completely alone, while the man she had trusted for nearly 2 years walked out that church door without looking back once. See, if you had been standing in her shoes that morning, what would you have done? See, before we go any further, if stories like this one speak to something in your soul, please take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. See, I put my heart into every single story here, and I would love for you to come along for the whole journey. See, drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. See, now let's go back to Red Willow, Montana, 1889, and find out what really happened that morning and why it changed everything. See, the dress had taken Clara Whitmore 11 days to finish. See, not because it was complicated, though it was, but because she kept stopping. See, she would hold up a seam to the window light, turn it slow, decide it wasn't right, and take it apart. See, start again. Her mother had done the same thing with everything worth doing. See, if it's worth wearing once, Margaret Whitmore used to say, stitching by lamplight until her fingers cramped, it's worth wearing correctly. Clara had inherited the habit and most of the stubbornness that came with it. See, the morning of the wedding, she put the dress on alone. See, there was no mother to button the back, no sister to fuss over her hair. See, just Clara in front of the small oval mirror her father had hauled from Missouri 20 years ago when Red Willow was barely a name on a surveyor's map. See, she did the buttons herself, fingers working up her spine from the bottom. See, she looked at herself for a long moment. Then she picked up her gloves, said nothing to no one, and walked out into the September morning. See, she had asked Ruth Calhoun to walk with her to the church, and Ruth had agreed, though even then, something in Ruth's eyes had felt off. See, distant, like a woman rehearsing an apology she hadn't yet given. See, Clara had noticed and told herself she was imagining things. See, nerves made everything look sideways. The church was full. See, Red Willow wasn't a large town, but it showed up for weddings and funerals with equal commitment. See, and a marriage between Clara Whitmore, the tailor's daughter, who'd kept her family's land alive on sheer stubbornness, and Edwin Rourke, who owned the largest mercantile between Billings and the territorial line, was. See, the kind of event people blocked out the morning for. See, the pews were packed. Children sat on their fathers' laps. See, women in their best Sunday clothes fanned themselves, despite the cool temperature. See, 3 ranch hands had come in still smelling of horses and didn't apologize for it. See, Clara walked down that aisle and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like something in her life was finally moving forward rather than just holding still. See, Edwin stood at the front, turned to watch her come. See, he was a tall man, well-dressed always, with the kind of groomed confidence that came from never having had to worry seriously about money. See, he had a good face, Clara had always thought so. A face that knew how to smile at the right moment. See, he was smiling now. She thought it was for her. The minister had gotten through the opening words, had asked them to face each other when Edwin reached into his jacket. See, Clara assumed he was reaching for the ring. He was not reaching for the ring. See, he produced a folded document several pages. She could see the thickness of it and held it out toward her. See, Clara, he said. His voice was quiet but perfectly controlled. See, the kind of quiet that carries. She looked at the papers. See, what is this? Something we should have settled weeks ago, he said it gently. The way you speak to someone who has been confused about a simple thing. See, just a few transfers, property management, the homestead, the business accounts. See, standard arrangements between married people. Clara didn't take the papers. See, she had been managing that homestead for 3 years since her father died. See, She had negotiated supply prices with men twice her age, patched the fence line herself in January, kept the tailoring business running through 2 brutal winters when half the town's commerce dried up. See, she knew what property management looked like in a document, and she knew what standard arrangements was a polite way of saying. See, I'm not signing anything at the altar, Edwin. A small sound went through the congregation. See, not quite a gasp, just a collective awareness that something had shifted. See, Edwin's smile didn't disappear exactly. It just changed. See, like a door closing slowly rather than slamming. It's nothing alarming, he said. See, just a formality. After we're married, there's no distinction anyway. See, then there's no reason to sign it before, Clara said. See, he looked at her for a moment, and in that moment, in the silence of that packed church, with flowers on every pew end, and children watching, and the minister standing between them with his hands folded, Clara saw something move behind Edwin. See, Rourke's eyes that she had never seen there before. See, not hurt, not even frustration, something colder than either. See, Clara. His voice had dropped further. Don't make this difficult. See, I'm not making anything difficult. I'm telling you I won't sign papers I haven't read. In a church with 100 people watching, the morning of my wedding. She kept her voice level. See, she was proud of that later. If this is important, we can discuss it tonight. See, Edwin lowered the papers. He was quiet for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 12 seconds. See, then he turned to the congregation. I owe all of you an apology for bringing you here today, he said. See, not quietly anymore, loudly, deliberately, the voice of a man used to addressing rooms. See, I've been a fool. I almost married a woman who has been hiding debts for years, debts against her property, against her business, against her family's estate. See, debts I only discovered when I began looking into our financial future together. He folded the papers back into his jacket with a kind of theatrical calm. See, I cannot, in good conscience, bind my name and my business to that kind of deception. See, I'm sorry you all had to witness this. Clara heard someone behind her pull in a sharp breath. See, she heard a child ask its mother what was happening. See, she heard nothing else clearly for a moment because the blood had gone loud in her ears and the floor had become something she had to consciously remind herself was still solid beneath her feet. See, Edwin Rourke buttoned his jacket, nodded once to the minister, and walked down the aisle. See, people moved out of his way. He didn't rush. He walked like a man who had done what needed doing and felt settled about it. See, the church door opened, and September light came in, and then the door swung shut behind him, and he was gone. See, Clara stood at the altar alone. She became aware of her own hands still at her sides, gloves smooth and white and entirely useless. See, she became aware of the dress. 11 days. She became aware of the sound of the congregation, which had gone from stunned silence into something lower and more dangerous, the early murmur of people deciding what they believed. See, Ruth Calhoun in the third pew was staring at her lap. See, Clara looked out at the faces she had known her entire life. See, faces she'd sewn coats for, fixed hems for, accepted modest payment from when times were tight. See, she looked at them and read the things she feared most. Not anger, not even judgment, but something worse. See, embarrassment. The particular discomfort of people who did not want to be associated with whatever this was. See, she would not cry, not here. She would not give this room or the story it would carry home a single tear. See, she lifted her chin the smallest degree and turned toward the side door. See, that was when she heard the sound of a pew bench, not scraping just one slow creak, the kind made by a man who moves like he doesn't particularly care whether anyone notices him or not. See, from the very back row a figure rose. Not Edwin's height, not Edwin's dress. See, a heavier coat, trail-worn. A face with too much weather on it for a man only 40 years old, though the eyes under all that wear were very still and very clear. See, Silas Crowley. He had a cattle operation 12 miles north of town. See, he came to Red Willow when he needed supplies, sometimes when he needed to file paperwork at the county office. See, he did not socialize particularly. He was not unkind. People who knew him said that, but he was the sort of man who kept the edges of himself to himself. See, Clara had exchanged perhaps 60 words with him over the last 3 years. See, maybe 70. He walked down the aisle. The congregation watched him the same way they'd been watching everything else, silently, collectively, in the grip of a morning that kept refusing to resolve. See, he reached Clara and didn't say anything immediately. See, he reached up, unclasped the coat he was wearing, a heavy canvas ranch coat, nothing elegant, and settled it over her shoulders. See, she almost pulled away. She didn't want anyone's pity. See, she could feel it curdling inside her chest at the very idea. See, it's chilly out, Silas said, as if that were the entire reason. See, I've got the wagon outside. I can take you home if you'd like to leave. See, I'm fine, Clara said, which was a complete lie. I know you are, he said, without any particular emphasis on it. See, like it was simply obvious. The offer stands regardless. See, she looked at him. He wasn't performing anything for the congregation. See, he wasn't looking at them. He was looking at her, waiting, the way you wait for a person to make up their own mind. See, fine, she said. Yes, thank you. They walked up the aisle together. See, Clara kept her eyes forward. She would not look at the pews. See, she heard the low sound of voices starting up behind her theories, already being assembled and shared, and she blocked them out and kept walking. See, the church door opened. September air hit her face. See, outside, Silas's wagon was hitched to a roan mare who stood with patient disinterest at the churchyard fence. See, Clara climbed up without help. He came around the other side and took the reins, and they were moving before the church door had closed again behind them. See, they said nothing for a few minutes. The town passed the post office, the milliner, the stretch of Main Street that Edwin's mercantile dominated. See, Clara looked straight ahead at the road. He knew, she said, finally. See, Silas didn't ask what she meant. Probably, he said. See, he planned it. Maybe. Not maybe. She heard her own voice sharpen and didn't moderate it. See, men who are genuinely shocked don't walk out of a church like that. See, they don't have speeches ready. He had a speech ready. See, Silas said nothing for a moment. You're right, he said then. See, that's probably true. She looked at him sideways. See, you're not going to tell me I'm being harsh? I'm not sure what that would accomplish. See, Clara felt something loosen slightly in her chest. See, not relief exactly. More like the small release of finally being in a space where she wasn't being handled. See, everyone in that room believed him, she said. Not everyone. See, enough of them. He didn't argue that because it was true. See, people believe the first loud story they hear, Silas said. See, doesn't mean the second one won't reach them. The wagon turned off the main road onto the smaller track that ran along Cottonwood Creek toward the Whitmore homestead. See, the creek was low this time of year, murmuring over its stones. See, Clara had grown up with that sound. It had been in the background of every serious thing that had ever happened to her. See, when they reached the property, Silas stopped the wagon. See, he made no move to get down. He held the reins loosely. See, you don't have to say anything right now, he said. See, or explain, or perform being fine. I told you I am fine. See, I heard you. The same flat, unhurried tone. I meant in general. See, you don't owe the town a reaction, and you don't owe me one either. See, she sat with that for a moment. It was such a specific thing to say. See, not things will get better, she had no patience for that. See, not he'll get what's coming to him, she didn't know that, and neither did he. See, just a statement that she did not owe anyone a performance. See, somehow that was the thing that nearly undid her. She pressed her mouth together until the feeling passed. See, those documents he had, she said, they weren't just a formality. See, no, they would have transferred control of this property. See, the house, the acreage, the tailoring accounts. She looked down at her hands, still in the white glove of, see, he would have owned everything I've built since my parents died. See, every decision I would have needed his signature. See, Silas nodded slowly. I thought he wanted to marry me, Clara said. See, I didn't know he wanted to own me. That was the truest thing she had said all morning. See, maybe the truest thing she'd said in 2 years. Silas looked at her steadily and then looked back at the road. See, those are different things, he said. Most people get that confused going in both directions. He picked up the reins. See, you'll be all right, Clara. You don't know that. See, no, he agreed, I don't. He looked at her one more time. See, but you handled yourself in there better than most people handle an ambush with a year to prepare. See, so I'm putting reasonable odds on you. He gave a short, nearly imperceptible nod, the closest thing he seemed to have to a goodbye, and turned the wagon back toward the main road. See, Clara watched him go. Then she turned toward her front door, still wearing his coat over her wedding dress. See, she had survived the death of her father, the winter of '86, 3 droughts, and one bank dispute she had won by showing up with better documentation than they'd expected from a woman managing land alone. See, she had sewn her own wedding dress by lamplight, and she had stood at an altar and refused to be owned. See, she was not broken, but she was furious and frightened, and she had the particular clarity that comes to people who have just watched something they thought was solid turn out to be made of nothing at all. See, the dress would have to come off. There were seams to unpick and fabric to salvage. See, she was not going to waste 11 days of work on a man who hadn't deserved one. See, but first she stood on her own porch in the cooling morning air and let herself shake for exactly 2 minutes. See, just 2. She counted them, then she went inside and got to work. See, what she didn't know yet, couldn't know yet, was that Edwin Rourke had never been a man who accepted losing gracefully. See, and the morning she had humiliated him by simply refusing to sign wasn't an ending. See, it was the opening move in a fight she didn't yet know she was in. See, the coat stayed on the hook by her front door for 3 days. See, Clara hadn't planned to keep it there. She'd meant to fold it and return it to Silas Crowley the next time she saw him in town, which she assumed would be soon enough. See, but the first morning after the wedding that wasn't, she walked past that hook without touching the coat, and the second morning she did the same, and by the third morning she had stopped noticing it was there. See, it just became part of the house, another thing hanging where it hung. See, the dress she dealt with immediately. See, the morning after the ceremony, before she had eaten anything, or lit the stove, or done a single practical thing, Clara went to the bedroom, took the wedding dress off its hook, laid it across the bed, and began taking it apart. See, not tearing, she wasn't angry enough to waste good fabric. See, just careful, methodical unpicking, the same way her mother had taught her to disassemble anything worth saving. See, seam by seam, button by button. By noon, she had a folded stack of white fabric and a small pile of buttons in a dish on the windowsill, and the dress had ceased to exist as a dress and become raw material again. See, something useful, something forward-facing. She felt better after that. See, not good, but better. The first cancellation arrived the following Tuesday. See, a note slipped under her shop door, which was how people in Red Willow delivered bad news when they didn't want to look you in the face. See, Margaret Finch, who had ordered a winter coat in August, wrote that she had decided to alter her existing coat rather than commission a new one. See, she hoped Clara understood. She did not elaborate. See, Clara understood perfectly. She set the note on her workbench and went back to the shirt she was hemming and did not throw anything, which she considered a meaningful act of self-control. See, the second cancellation came on Thursday. Verbal this time, a woman named Helen Pratt, who stopped in front of the shop window, made eye contact with Clara through the glass, and then kept walking without coming inside. See, she had 3 yards of Clara's wool held in deposit. See, she never came back for it. By the end of the second week, Clara had lost 4 orders and had 2 more she suspected were about to dissolve. See, the numbers weren't catastrophic yet, but they didn't need to be catastrophic to be serious. See, the tailoring business was what kept the property taxes paid, what kept the seed account solvent, what bridged the gap between what the land gave her and what she actually needed. See, she had no cushion. She had never been able to build one. See, a woman running a homestead alone did not accumulate cushion, she accumulated debt and managed it carefully and prayed for nothing to go wrong simultaneously. See, nothing in her life had ever cooperated with that prayer. See, she was in the shop on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the wedding, working through a pile of mending she'd taken in for reduced rates just to keep her hands busy and some money moving when she heard boots on the porch. See, heavy, unhurried boots, the kind that didn't scrape. See, she looked up. Silas Crowley stood in the doorway with a canvas sack in one hand and his hat in the other. See, he looked around the shop the way people look at a place they've never been inside before, taking it in without much expression. See, the bolts of fabric along one wall, the dress forms. See, the work table with its pins and chalk marks, the small iron stove in the corner that was doing its best against October. See, Mr. Crowley. Clara said, Miss Whitmore. He held up the canvas sack. See, I've got some things that need work, if you've got time. See, she put down the mending. What kind of things? See, he came inside and set the sack on the counter without being invited to, though he did it without presumption, the way a person sets something down when they need their hands free, not like they own the space. See, he opened it and pulled out a shirt with a torn collar, a coat with a sleeve seam that had given out entirely, 2 wool blankets with moth holes, and a length of wagon canvas with a split running along one edge. See, Clara looked at the pile. She looked at him. This is your way of being charitable, she said. See, he met her eyes. No, this is my way of getting torn things repaired. His voice was level, not defensive. See, I've got 4 hands on the ranch who go through shirts like paper. See, the blanket is from the bunkhouse. The canvas I use for covering the hay when it rains, and it tore in August, and I've been putting it off because I hate making trips to town. He paused. See, if you don't want the work, say so. But don't accuse me of charity when I'm standing here with actual torn things. See, Clara looked at the collar on the shirt. Was genuinely destroyed, not staged. See, the coat seam had failed at the stress point the way they always did when someone had been forcing the arm through wrong for months. See, the blanket holes were real moth damage, irregular and random, not cut. See, I'll do it, she said. I pay going rate, he said. See, not more, not less. I'd appreciate you not making that strange. See, I wasn't going to make it strange. Good, he picked his hat back up. See, when would it be ready? 10 days for the canvas and blankets. See, the coat and shirt sooner end of the week if I'm not buried. See, he nodded. I'll come back end of the week. He turned to go, then stopped with his hand on the doorframe. See, he didn't turn around. People in this town have short memories when the next interesting thing comes along, he said. See, I've watched it happen more than once. Is that meant to be comforting? See, it's meant to be true, he said. Whether it's comforting is up to you. See, and then he was gone. See, boots down the porch steps. See, unhurried. See, the same as always. See, Clara stood at the counter and looked at the pile of his broken things, and felt, against her will and without any particular reason, slightly less alone than she had 5 minutes ago. See, she hated that it helped. She hated that anything external helped. See, she had spent 3 years building a version of herself that didn't require help, and here she was, steadied by a rancher's torn coat and a sentence that wasn't even particularly kind. See, just true. She picked up the shirt and started examining the collar. See, she had work to do. The rumors moved the way rumors always move in small towns, not in a rush, but in that slow, thorough way that eventually reaches every corner, the way water finds every crack in a foundation. See, by the end of October, Clara had heard 4 different versions of the story Edwin had told. See, in one version, she had borrowed money from his mercantile accounts without telling him. See, in another, her father had left secret debts that she'd concealed during the engagement. See, in the worst version, the one she heard third-hand from the woman who ran the milliner's, Clara had deliberately targeted Edwin because his business would cover what she owed. See, she did not confront anyone who repeated these stories. See, she thought about it. She planned it a few times, lying awake at night, working out the exact words she would say to Helen Pratt, or Ruth Calhoun, or the man at the feed store who had gone from calling her Miss Whitmore to barely nodding. See, she assembled arguments, she organized evidence. She lay there in the dark, being very right and very alone, and ultimately said nothing to anyone, because she understood the way her mother had understood. See, the way any woman who had survived on a frontier understood that a woman arguing about her own reputation rarely improved it. See, so she worked. She worked with the precision and stubbornness that had always been her primary weapon against everything the world threw at her. See, she finished Silas's repairs 4 days early, and they were perfect. The collar replaced entirely with a piece she matched so well you could barely tell it wasn't original. See, she took in every small job she could find. She hemmed curtains. See, she repaired a saddle strap for a man who needed it done fast and wasn't particular about who did it. See, she altered a dress for old Dorothy Marsh, who was 81 and hadn't left her house in 2 months and whom no one else had bothered to visit that season. See, Dorothy Marsh told 3 people about it. One of those people mentioned it to a rancher's wife. See, the rancher's wife sent a note asking if Clara could look at a coat that needed relining. See, so it was small, it was slow, but it was something. Silas came back with more work 2 weeks after the first load. See, a different shirt, this one a seam failure at the shoulder. See, a pair of heavy trousers with a knee blown out. A wool vest, he said, had shrunk wrong in the wash and needed letting out. See, which Clara recognized as impossible since the vest appeared to have been correctly washed and was simply slightly small for the man wearing it, which meant he'd bought it wrong to begin with. See, she said nothing about this. She let out the vest. See, you hired a new hand? She asked, looking at the pile. See, 2, he said. They come with the usual volume of destruction. See, I noticed. He glanced around the shop. She had 2 dresses on the forms, a new bolt of fabric against the wall, and a list of orders tacked above the workbench that was not as full as she wanted, but was fuller than it had been 2 weeks ago. See, he seemed to note this without making a point of it. See, I mentioned to a couple of the operations near me that you do canvas work, he said. See, it was delivered the same way he delivered everything flatly, without preamble. See, Malone's outfit and the Hendersons. They go through wagon canvas faster than anybody, and the nearest place that does it otherwise is 40 miles east. See, Clara stopped. You told them. I told them the facts. See, you do canvas repair, and you do it right, and you're 12 miles closer than the alternative. He said it like a business transaction described plainly to someone who might otherwise misunderstand it. See, if they come, they come. If they don't, they don't. See, I didn't tell them to be charitable about it. She looked at him for a moment. See, why? Because it's a rational recommendation, he said. See, Malone's been losing canvas jobs since the woman over in Harlan moved away 2 years ago. See, it doesn't do me any good if he thinks I led him somewhere inadequate. See, that's not what I meant, and you know it. He held her gaze. See, I know what you meant. A pause that ran just slightly long. See, because it was the right thing to do, that's all. See, Clara opened her mouth, closed it. She turned back to the workbench. See, the trousers will be 3 days, the shirt by tomorrow. See, the vest, it'll fit correctly now, but I want you to know that vest was purchased too small to begin with. See, I'm aware, he said with what she was fairly certain was the smallest possible version of a dry amusement. See, my housekeeper bought it. She believes optimism is a valid measurement strategy. See, Clara almost smiled. Not quite, close. End of the week then, she said. See, end of the week. Malone sent his foreman in on a Tuesday with 40 feet of torn canvas, and the information that he'd heard Clara was the person to see. See, the Henderson outfit sent their oldest son the following Thursday. See, neither of them mentioned Edwin Rourke or the wedding, or any version of the story that had been circulating since September. See, they mentioned canvas, and they mentioned the price, and Clara quoted them fairly, and they agreed, and that was the entirety of it. See, she didn't cry about this, which she was proud of. See, she wanted to. There was something in the simple, quiet restoration of being seen as a person who did work, rather than a person who was a story that hit her somewhere she hadn't known, was still tender. See, but she had work to do, and crying over being given work to do was not the kind of person she wanted to be. See, she added a second work table for the canvas jobs. November arrived with cold that meant business, the kind of cold that came down off the mountains with intent. See, Clara started the stove earlier each morning, and worked later each evening because the light was better and because the alternative to working was lying awake, listening to wind push against the windows and thinking about things she couldn't fix yet. See, she and Silas had developed a pattern without ever agreeing to one. See, he came to town roughly every 2 weeks for supplies. See, he brought repair work. He paid what she charged. Sometimes he had coffee in the shop, not because he asked, but because she put it on the stove, and he didn't decline it. See, they talked about practical things, the canvas business, a hardware problem he was having with a fence line, whether the territorial winter was going to arrive early. See, sometimes they argued about practical things. He thought she was undercharging for canvas repair. See, she thought his opinion on her prices was none of his business. See, he said it wasn't about opinion, it was arithmetic, and she told him he could do his own arithmetic on his own prices. See, he came back 2 weeks later and did not mention her prices. See, she did not raise them. She was not romantic about any of this. See, she was too recently burned for anything like that. See, she simply noted carefully, with the same attention she gave to seam lines, that there was a man who spoke to her like she was a person of sense, who didn't manage his words around her as though she were fragile. See, who didn't bring her sympathy she hadn't asked for. See, it was a small thing. She filed it away and went back to work. See, what she couldn't file away, what kept surfacing when she wasn't paying attention, was the question of Edwin's documents. See, she had told Silas in the wagon that he had planned it, and she had been right about that in the obvious way. See, but the specifics of it, the shape of what he had actually wanted, kept nagging at her like an uneven hem. See, why those particular transfers? Why that particular timing? Edwin Rourke was a prosperous merchant. See, he did not need the Whitmore homestead the way a struggling man might. See, he had enough, more than enough. So why would he invest nearly 2 years in a woman whose land and business together barely amounted to what he grossed in 3 months of trade? See, she turned that question over through November without answering it. See, the answer came to her from an unlikely source. See, his name was Aldous Webb, and he was a territorial surveyor, and he arrived in Red Willow on a Wednesday in late November with a mule, a lot of specialized equipment, and the unhurried manner of a man on government time. See, he took a room at the boarding house and began asking questions about the creek drainage and the terrain east of town, and within 48 hours, the rumor was everywhere. See, the railroad company was considering an extension through this part of the territory, and they needed water, and Cottonwood Creek was the most consistent water source within a 15-mile radius. See, Clara heard this on a Thursday morning from Dorothy Marsh's niece, who had heard it from the man at the land office, who had spoken directly with Webb over supper at the boarding house. See, she stood in her shop and felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet, though it didn't move. See, Cottonwood Creek ran along the western edge of her property. See, had run there for the 23 years she had been alive, and the 20 years before that, when her parents had filed the original claim. See, she had grown up with the sound of it. She had fished in it as a child and hauled water from it in the drought year when the secondary well went bad. See, it was just a creek. A good one, reliable, but just a creek. See, unless you were a railroad company that needed a water station. See, unless your rail line was coming through Montana territory and you needed to stop somewhere between 2 points and fill your engine, and the geography happened to funnel you exactly toward a strip of land with reliable water access. See, unless the water station needed to be built on property adjacent to the creek, which meant acquiring a portion of that property, which meant negotiating with whoever owned it, see, which meant that the owner of 170 acres of what everyone in Red Willow had always considered ordinary frontier homestead land might very shortly find herself in possession of something extremely valuable. See, Clara sat down on the stool behind her workbench. She thought about the documents Edwin had produced at the altar. See, not the general shape of them, she'd thought about that plenty, but the specific language he had used when he presented them. See, property management, future land sales, authorization for external negotiations. See, she had assumed those words were about control of the existing property in the general sense. See, a husband wanting to dominate his wife's assets, which was common enough to be nearly unremarkable. See, but future land sales specifically, external negotiations specifically. See, she stood up and went to the county land office that same afternoon. See, Thomas Birch ran the land office with the meticulous boredom of a man who genuinely loved paperwork and had found his ideal occupation. See, he was 60, precise, and had the useful quality of being entirely without social agenda. See, he was not a gossip, because gossip required interest in other people's interior lives, and Thomas Birch's interest stopped at the edge of the documented facts. See, I need to look at any inquiry records for the Whitmore property, Clara said. See, from the last year. Thomas blinked, looking for anything in particular. See, anyone who asked questions about the parcel, inquiries about the creek access specifically. See, survey requests. She paused. Anyone who asked about future use designations. See, Thomas disappeared into the back room for 20 minutes. See, he returned with a thin folder and spread it on the counter without comment. See, there were 3 inquiry records. 2 were older, one from her father's time, a neighboring rancher asking about boundary lines. See, standard. The 3rd was from February of this year. See, 8 months ago. 7 months before the wedding. See, the inquiry had been filed under the name of a land management firm out of Billings. See, Clara didn't recognize the firm's name, but attached to the inquiry record as a reference contact was a name she knew. See, Edwin Rourke. He had retained that firm. He had directed them to make inquiry about the Whitmore property's water access and the legal terms under which that access could be transferred or licensed to a third party. See, in February, 8 months before he had stood at the altar and called her a fraud. See, Clara stood at Thomas Birch's counter and looked at that piece of paper and felt something move through her that was not quite grief and not quite rage, but something that sat in the space between them, something very still and very cold. See, he had known about the railroad survey before she had. See, before anyone in Red Willow had. See, he had known because he had invested in the kind of information that costs money and comes quietly, the kind of information that a man with trade connections across the territory could acquire if he knew who to ask and what to pay. See, he had courted her knowing. He had spent 2 years being kind and patient and reliable knowing. See, he had chosen the wedding date and planned the ceremony and let her sew her own dress and stood at the altar with documents ready, knowing. See, the woman he had spent 2 years convincing to trust him was not a woman he had fallen for. See, she was a parcel of land with a creek running through it. See, Thomas Birch was watching her carefully, the way careful people watch someone receiving bad news, ready to be useful but not presuming to know what useful looked like. See, can I get a copy of this record? Clara asked. It's a public record, he said. See, I can make you a copy by tomorrow morning. Thank you. She folded her hands on the counter, steadying them. See, do you know anything about the survey? The railroad extension? See, not officially, he said. Unofficially, the surveyor came in here Monday and asked general questions about the creek parcels. See, he seemed particularly interested in the 1/4 mile between your western fence and the county road. He paused. See, I told him what I could tell him from the public record. See, which is that the Whitmore property is privately held and the owner would need to be approached directly. See, good, Clara said. Thank you, Thomas. She walked back to the shop in the cold November afternoon with her hands in her pockets and her mind doing the kind of rapid, merciless calculation it did best when it had something concrete to work with. See, not panic. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford and had never particularly indulged. See, just arithmetic. Brutal, clear arithmetic. If the railroad came through, and if they needed water access from her land, and if she still owned that land free and clear, then she had something to negotiate with. See, something real. Something that no amount of gossip and canceled tailoring orders could touch. See, but if Edwin had managed to get those documents signed, if she had stood at that altar and accepted his terms, before she understood what they meant, then the person negotiating with the railroad company would not have been Clara Whitmore. See, it would have been Edwin Rourke. Through the authority she would have handed him over land her parents had sacrificed 23 years to hold. See, he would have made a fortune from her family's land, and she would have had no legal standing to stop him. See, she would have been his wife. The property would have been, by territory law and Edwin's very careful documents, under his management for any future sales or external negotiations. See, she thought about sitting across from him at suppers. See, she thought about the particular smile he had, the way he'd touched her hand in public, always calibrated, always observed. See, the way he'd suggested, gently, on 3 separate occasions, that a woman running a property alone was carrying more than she should, and wasn't it lucky she'd have support soon? See, she thought about how close she had come. She sat down on the porch steps of the shop because her legs had decided, without consulting her, that they needed a moment. See, the cold came up through the wood immediately. She didn't move. See, Silas Crowley's wagon came down the main road at that exact moment, as though the world had a particularly blunt sense of timing. See, he was heading toward the feed store. He saw her sitting on the steps. See, he slowed. He didn't stop immediately. He pulled the wagon to the side of the road and sat there for a moment, as if he were deciding whether stopping was something she'd want or something she'd resent. See, he got down and came over. He didn't ask if she was all right. See, she had noticed he rarely asked questions he already knew the answers to. See, he sat down on the step beside her, which was not a particularly dignified thing for a man his size to do, and he looked at the street and said nothing. See, Clara looked at the street too. He knew about the railroad, she said. See, a long pause. Since February, she said. He had people making inquiries about my land in February. See, we didn't start talking seriously until April. He knew the whole time. See, Silas breathed out slowly. The kind of slow exhale that is not quite a word but is also not nothing. See, I need to see those documents, Clara said. The ones he had at the altar. See, I need to know exactly what authority they would have given him. See, do you have a copy? No. He took them when he walked out. She paused. See, but they were drawn up by someone, a lawyer or a firm. See, there has to be a record. Silas was quiet for a moment. See, I know a man in Billings, he said. A lawyer, honest one, which is rarer than it should be. See, if you want, I'll handle it, Clara said. See, he stopped. I'm not saying I don't appreciate the offer, she said, and meant it. See, but if I let you fight this, it becomes your victory over Edwin. See, and I need it to be mine. She looked at him directly. See, do you understand that? He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite surprise, more like recognition. See, the look of someone encountering a thing they had thought existed but rarely seen proven. See, yes, he said, I understand that. Good. She stood up. See, brushed the cold off the back of her skirt. I'll figure it out. See, I know you will, he said, same tone he always used. See, matter of fact, not performed, just the flattest, most unadorned version of certainty, delivered like it was simply obvious. See, she went back inside. She had a lot of work ahead of her. See, not the canvas and collar kind. The other kind, the kind that required going through her parents' papers, finding every receipt and ledger and delivery record she had inherited, along with the land, see, and building something that Edwin Rourke had not planned for when he spent 2 years calculating his way toward her creek. See, he had planned for a woman who would be grateful. He had planned for a woman who needed rescuing. See, he had not planned for a woman who had been running this land alone since she was 29, who knew every debt and every asset and every year her family had negotiated to stay solvent. See, who had sat across from bankers and surveyors and county officials without a man beside her and held her own every single time. See, he had picked the wrong creek. Outside she heard Silas's wagon moving again, heading to the feed store, unhurried, the way he moved through every part of his life. See, and Clara turned back to her workbench and picked up the next item in the pile and kept going. See, because that was what she did. That was, in the end, what she had always done. See, And Edwin Rourke was about to discover exactly how much of a problem that was going to be for him. See, the copy of the inquiry record sat on Clara's workbench for 4 days before she let herself do anything with it. See, not because she was afraid of it, she was past afraid. See, what she was, more precisely, was strategic the way her father had been strategic about the hard winters, the way her mother had been strategic about money when there wasn't enough of it. See, you didn't move until you knew where you were moving. See, you didn't spend energy on the dramatic gesture when the quiet one would hold better. See, she kept working. Canvas jobs, shirt repairs. See, a complicated alteration for a woman named Frances Dell who was getting married in January and needed her grandmother's dress let out and updated and made to look like it hadn't been sitting in a cedar chest for 40 years. See, Clara worked on that dress with particular care, which surprised her a little. See, she had some feelings about wedding dresses currently, none of them generous. See, but Frances Dell was 23 and entirely without guile, and the grandmother's dress deserved better than Clara's bad mood, so she set the mood aside and did the work right. See, she thought while she worked. Thinking was easier with her hands moving. See, the inquiry record told her what Edwin had known, and roughly when he'd known it. See, it told her that he had retained a land firm and directed them toward her property specifically. See, it told her the timeline of his deception, which was more complete and more calculated than even she had initially assumed. See, what it did not tell her was the full legal shape of what he had been planning, the specific mechanism by which he had intended to transfer authority over the land once the railroad deal materialized. See, for that, she needed the documents themselves, the ones he had produced at the altar and then taken with him when he walked out. See, she spent the better part of a week thinking about how to get them. See, she could not walk into Edwin's store and ask. She had not been on speaking terms with the man since September, and she had no intention of changing that. See, she could not send someone else to ask without tipping her hand. See, she could write to the land management firm in Billings, but any firm that had been retained by Edwin would have no reason to share documents with the woman those documents had been designed to dispossess. See, she was working through this problem on a Thursday evening, the stove going well against a December that had arrived with genuine severity, when someone knocked at the shop door. See, it was Ruth Calhoun. Clara looked at her through the glass for a moment before she opened the door. See, Ruth had been her closest friend for 6 years. They had grown up in neighboring properties, had attended the same one-room school, see, had helped each other through the particular difficulties of frontier womanhood with the pragmatic solidarity of people who understood that some things you simply got through together. See, they had shared meals and sorrows and the specific kind of laughter that comes from exhaustion and absurdity colliding. See, Ruth had sat in the third pew on the morning of the wedding and stared at her own lap while Edwin destroyed Clara's reputation in front of 100 people. See, Clara opened the door. "I know," Ruth said immediately. See, she was holding a covered dish, which Clara recognized as the kind of offering people make when they have done something that food cannot fix, but they don't know what else to bring. See, "I know I have no right to be here. I know what I did." See, "What did you do?" Clara asked, because she wanted to hear Ruth say it. See, Ruth looked at her straight. To her credit, she didn't flinch. See, "I knew something was wrong. Weeks before. Edwin came to talk to Harold, my husband, about some kind of business arrangement. See, Harold told me afterward it was about land investment. See, he didn't say your land, but he said property near the creek, and I knew. See, I should have told you, and I didn't, because Harold said it wasn't our business, and I was a coward." She stopped. See, "I was a coward, and I'm sorry, and I don't expect you to forgive me right now or maybe ever, but I needed to say it." See, Clara stood in the doorway for a long moment. See, the wind pushed past Ruth's shoulder and into the shop, and the stove blight made everything warm-colored, and the covered dish smelled like the potato soup Ruth made when things were bad, which she had been making for as long as Clara had known her. See, "Come in," Clara said. They sat at the small table in the back of the shop with the soup between them and the stove working hard, and neither of them speaking immediately. See, Clara ate because she was hungry, and because accepting food wasn't the same as forgiving anything yet. See, what did Harold know exactly? She asked. Ruth wrapped her hands around her mug. See, that Edwin had been investigating the property, that he believed the railroad was coming through, and that the Whitmore Creek land was sitting right in the path. See, Harold said Edwin had been talking about it since spring, that the woman was sitting on a gold strike and didn't know it. Ruth paused. See, he called you that, the woman, like you were just a complication attached to a parcel. See, that's accurate, Clara said. That's exactly what I was to him. See, Harold thought it was just business talk. Men get excited about land deals, he said. See, I should have pushed harder. Ruth looked at her mug. See, when the wedding happened, when Edwin stood up and did what he did, I sat there, and I told myself there was nothing I could have done, and that was a lie, and I knew it was a lie, and I still sat there. See, why are you here now? Ruth looked up. Because I heard about the surveyor. See, because I know what that means for your land. See, and because Edwin has been in the store telling people the railroad deal is going to be complicated by your property situation, and that there may need to be legal clarification of the ownership questions before anything, see, can move forward. She set her mug down carefully. See, he's still trying, Clara. He hasn't stopped. Clara went very still. See, what ownership questions, she said. I don't know the details. See, Harold heard it from the man who works at the store, Frank Tillis, who heard Edwin talking to someone in the back office. See, something about a claim against the estate. Ruth shook her head. See, I don't know what that means legally. Clara knew exactly what it meant legally. See, a filed claim against an estate could create a legal encumbrance on the property, a complication that would have to be resolved before any sale or transfer could proceed cleanly. See, if Edwin filed a claim and it was accepted by the county, it would sit on the property record like a splinter, small enough to seem manageable and sharp enough to cause real damage. See, it wouldn't stop the railroad deal, but it would make her position significantly weaker. See, she would be negotiating with a cloud over the title, and the railroad company's lawyers would know it, and they would offer her less because of it. See, and if the claim was large enough, if it carried enough apparent legitimacy, it could freeze the process entirely while it was disputed, which might be long enough for Edwin to maneuver his way into the middle of the negotiation by other means. See, he was not finished. He had lost the wedding. He had lost the documents. See, but he was a man who played multiple boards at once, and she had only been looking at one of them. See, she thought about the conversation on the porch steps, about telling Silas she needed this to be her victory. See, she still meant that. She meant it more now, if anything, because she understood that Edwin's greatest weapon against her was the assumption shared by almost everyone in Red Willow, including some people who liked her, that a woman alone, see, on a disputed property, facing a wealthy and connected merchant, would eventually need someone to come and sort it out for her. See, she could not afford to prove that assumption right. See, I need you to find out what claim he's planning to file, Clara said. See, not Harold, you. Harold will talk himself out of helping and find a business reason to stay uninvolved. She looked at Ruth directly. See, can you find out without him knowing you're looking? See, Ruth blinked. This was not the response she had expected. See, she had probably expected some version of tears or anger or a long, difficult silence that she would have to sit through as penance. See, she had not expected Clara to immediately hand her an assignment. See, yes, Ruth said. Frank Tillis talks. He's always talked. See, his wife is in my sewing circle. Good. Find out specifically what the claim is for, what amount, and whether it's been filed or just threatened. See, and Clara paused. Don't tell Harold what you're doing. See, not because I'm asking you to lie to your husband. See, but because Harold will want to manage this, and it will get back to Edwin through business channels and will lose the element of surprise. See, Ruth looked at her with something that was 1 part guilt and 2 parts, something that looked, unexpectedly, like relief. See, like a woman who had been waiting for someone to give her something useful to do with her regret. See, I'll find out, she said. See, After Ruth left, Clara sat alone with the empty soup pot and the sound of the wind against the shop windows and thought carefully about everything she was dealing with, assembling it the way she assembled a complicated garment piece by piece. See, each element laid out before she started connecting them. Because if you started connecting things before you knew what you had, you ended up with something that didn't fit. See, she had the inquiry record, which proved Edwin had been investigating her property before the engagement became serious. See, she had Ruth, who was motivated and had access. She had Thomas Birch at the land office, who was honest and would show her what was filed once it was filed. See, she had her parents' papers, which she had not yet gone through systematically because she had been dreading it in the way you dread the rooms of people you have lost, full of their handwriting, their arithmetic. See, their small recorded proof of having been alive and careful and real. See, she needed to go through those papers, not eventually. See now. She started that same night. Her father had kept everything. See, this was a quality she had inherited and also resented in herself, because keeping everything meant that going through everything took a very long time. See, 3 wooden crates under the bedroom floor, a trunk in the back room, a leather satchel that had belonged to her grandfather and passed down to her father and smelled still of whatever oil he'd used on it. See, all of it needed to go through her hands. She started with the crates. See, receipts going back to 1871, when her family had first staked the claim. See, store accounts, seed records, equipment purchases, payments for labor during harvest years when they'd brought in help. See, her mother's handwriting in the household ledger small and precise, and somehow still carrying her mother's personality in the slope of the letters, the way she'd underlined things that worried her. See, her father's larger, messier hand on the land documents. See, his signature on the county registration twice renewed. See, Clara worked through it methodically, setting aside anything that touched the store accounts or business debts, anything that involved purchases or credit arrangements with any mercantile in the county. See, she made a separate pile for anything related to medical expenses from the years her parents had been ill. See, because she suspected that was where Edwin intended to plant his claim. Illness was expensive, and record-keeping suffered when people were dying. See, by 2 a.m, she had gone through 1 crate and the leather satchel and found nothing alarming. See, her family's debts had been real but managed. Her father had been meticulous about settled accounts. He got a signed receipt for every payment, kept them all, filed them by year. See, it was the habit of a man who had dealt with enough disputes to know that a man's word dissolved faster than paper. See, she went to bed. She was back at the papers by 6. See, the second crate took most of the day because it covered the years of her parents' illnesses, which had overlapped in the particular cruel way. Illness sometimes arranges itself in families. Her mother declining through 1,886 and 1,000. See, 887. See, her father following through 1,888 until he died the spring before the wedding year. See, those years were expensive and chaotic, and the record-keeping showed it. See, her father's handwriting got shakier. Some receipts were undated. See, 1 ledger page had been started and then abandoned halfway through a column. See, she found 3 accounts that had been opened with local suppliers during those years. See, 2 of them had settlement notations paid in full, with dates and the suppliers' signatures. See, the 3rd was with the Rourke Mercantile. She stared at that one for a long time. See, the account showed purchases medicine, supplies, some fabric, items her mother had needed during the illness. See, the balance when it was opened was $42. See, there was a partial payment notation in her father's hand. See, but the settlement receipt, if there was one, was not in this crate. See, she went through everything again, twice. She found the receipt for the feed store account, the receipt for the apothecary on the East Road, the receipt for the lumber yard. See, she did not find the receipt for Rourke Mercantile. See, Edwin had been her family's supplier during her parents' illness. See, he had known about the account. He had access to the records of what they had purchased and what had been paid. See, if he had a copy of the account without the settlement receipt, or if the settlement receipt had simply never been issued properly. See, the way paperwork sometimes failed when people were too sick to push for it, then he had a plausible number to attach to a claim. See, $42 was not $900. See, but the account was from years ago, and people added interest and penalties and restocking fees and storage costs and every other creative arithmetic available to a man building a fraudulent claim from real-looking materials. See, she set the papers down. She pressed her palms flat on the workbench and looked at the wall and breathed steadily for approximately 30 seconds. See, then she went to find Silas Crowley. She had not gone to his ranch before. See, she knew where it was. Everyone in the county knew the rough location of everyone else's operation, but she had never had occasion to make the 12-mile trip north, and arriving unannounced at a man's property was not a thing she did lightly. See, but she had a wagon and a horse, and it was a clear December day, cold and sharp and completely still, and she needed to talk to someone who would be straight with her and not manage her feelings about it. See, the ranch was larger than she had imagined. Not grand, nothing out here was grand but solid. See, well-built barn. Fence lines that had been maintained through multiple hard winters rather than patched at the breaks. See, the kind of property that said the man running it paid attention and kept paying it. See, Silas came out of the barn when he heard her wagon. See, he looked at her across the yard with the particular stillness he seemed to carry everywhere, the kind that made you wonder what was happening behind it. See, I need to talk through something, Clara said. All right, he said. See, come inside. The house was plain and spare in the way that ranch houses were spare, not neglected, just functional. See, a big wooden table, a stove that was working hard, bookshelves along one wall that surprised her a little. See, not a lot of books, but enough that someone had been deliberate about them. See, she sat at the table and told him everything. The account she'd found, the missing receipt, the number Edwin might attach to it. See, she told him about Ruth and what Ruth had said about a claim being planned. See, she told him her theory about the timing and the mechanism. See, he listened without interrupting once, which she appreciated more than she could easily say because most people interrupted to demonstrate that they were listening, which had always seemed backward to her. See, when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" See, I need to find that receipt, she said. Or I need to prove the account was settled through other means, a bank record, a letter. Anything that shows the balance was brought to zero. See, if he files the claim and I can't produce a settlement, I'm fighting his word against my dead father's, and he knows I can't produce my father. See, your father dealt with the bank on the South Road, Silas said. See, Clara blinked. How do you know that? Because I used the same bank, and I knew your father before he got ill. See, he was a careful man. If he settled a significant account, he would have done it by bank draft, not cash. He paused. See, bank drafts leave records on both sides. You'd need to request the outgoing records from your father's account for those years. See, Clara stared at him. The bank keeps records that far back? See, 7 years minimum by territorial regulation. He said it the way he said most things, like it was just a fact that existed and she could take it or leave it. See, I had a dispute with a supplier 4 years ago. The bank record settled it. See, she sat with this for a moment. The account in question was from 1887. See, 7 years would cover it. Barely, but it would cover it. See, why do you know territorial banking regulations? She asked. See, something shifted in his face that was the closest thing to wry she had seen from him. See, because ignorance on that subject costs money, he said. See, I learned it the expensive way. She almost smiled. See, again. The same almost smile as before, happening more often than she strictly wanted to acknowledge. See, if the bank has a draft record, she said, and if it corresponds to the amount of the mercantile account, that's the settlement proof even without the receipt. See, it's strong evidence, he said. A lawyer would tell you it's not absolute, but it's strong. See, I'm not looking for absolute. I'm looking for enough to make his claim fall apart in front of a county official. She straightened. See, I'll go to the bank tomorrow. He nodded. Then, after a pause, he said something she hadn't expected. See, he's going to come to you first. She looked at him. See, what do you mean? Before he files anything, he'll come to you. See, men like Edwin don't file when they can threaten. Filing is permanent and public, and it can be examined. See, a threat is quieter and reversible. He looked at her steadily. See, he'll come to you, and he'll call it a reconciliation, and he'll explain that there are some financial complications that need to be sorted out. See, and he'll make it sound like he's doing you a favor by bringing them directly to you rather than to the county office. See, Clara was quiet, and when he does, Silas said, you'll already know everything. See, the bank record, the timeline, the inquiry he made in February. See, you'll know more than he thinks you know. He paused. See, that's worth something. It's worth everything, Clara said. See, she left the ranch an hour later with the cold at her back and the 12 miles home ahead of her and her mind already organizing itself into the next sequence of moves. See, she had the inquiry record. She would have the bank record by the end of the week. See, Ruth was working on the specifics of the claim. Thomas Birch would show her whatever was filed the moment it was filed. See, she had been moving defensively for 3 months, absorbing the cancellations, managing the reputation damage, surviving. See, that time was over. She was building a case now, the same way she built anything, piece by piece, each element chosen carefully, every seam checked before moving to the next. See, Edwin was going to come to her with a smile and a threat wrapped together, and when he did, she was going to be ready. See, the only question was whether she would be calm enough to let him finish talking before she showed him how ready. See, she was working on that part. Ruth sent word 4 days later through a note delivered by Ruth's youngest, who was 8 and apparently accustomed to carrying messages and not asking questions about them. See, the note was brief. Edwin had not yet filed. See, the claim he was preparing involved medical expenses, supply accounts, and what he was describing internally as outstanding fabric and material purchases from the illness years. The total figure he had assembled was $912. See, he intended to file before the end of the month. Frank Tillis had heard this directly. See, $912. Clara read the note twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the same place she was keeping the inquiry record. See, then she went to the bank. See, the bank manager was a man named Collier, who had met Clara exactly 3 times in his life, and had, on at least one of those occasions, spoken to her in the careful, simplified tones some men used with women in financial conversations, see, as if the concepts might be difficult, and it was important to be gentle about it. See, he was not a bad man. He was a limited one, which was sometimes worse. See, she explained what she needed. Account records for Hiram Whitmore, the years 1886 through 1888. See, specifically any bank drafts issued to Rourke Mercantile during those years. See, Collier looked uncertain. That's those records are archived, Miss Whitmore. See, it would take some time to understand it takes time, Clara said. See, I'm not asking for them this moment. I'm asking for them at your earliest convenience, which I would appreciate being as early as possible. She looked at him steadily. See, it's a legal matter. Collier straightened slightly. See, legal matters clarified things for him. He said he would have someone go through the archive by the end of the week. See, she was back in the shop that afternoon when the bell above the door rang and Edwin Rourke walked in. See, she had not seen him since September. He had not changed significantly. See, the same well-kept jacket, the same groomed confidence, the same face that knew exactly when to produce a smile. See, he produced one now, which told her everything about how he thought this conversation was going to go. See, Clara, he said. You look well, Edwin. She set down her scissors. See, I'm busy. I won't take much of your time. He came to the counter and stood across from her, and his smile modulated into something more serious, more regretful. See, he was very good at this. She could see, for the first time in months, how she had been taken in by it, and seeing it clearly made something hard and cold settle in her stomach. See, I've been thinking about the way things ended between us, and I want you to know I handled it badly. See, you stood in a church and called me a liar in front of 100 people, Clara said. See, what part of that do you feel you handled badly? See, something flickered behind his eyes. He recalibrated. See, I was upset. I had information I'd received about the property finances, and I reacted badly to it. See, that's not an excuse. He put his hands on the counter in a gesture that managed to look both humble and controlling. See, what I want to say is that I'd like to handle the remaining financial questions privately. See, between us, before anything formal becomes necessary. See, what financial questions, Clara? The smile again, gentler now. See, more sorrowful, the look of a reasonable man dealing with a difficult situation he hadn't wanted. See, your father's account with my store. The outstanding balance from the illness years. See, I've been patient about it because I understood the circumstances, but I've been advised that I need to formalize it. See, how much are you claiming, she said. He blinked. See, he had expected some version of defensive confusion. See, he had not expected the direct question delivered in that particular flat tone. See, the total outstanding supplies, medicine, material costs, the carrying fees from the years it's gone unaddressed comes to $912. See, against my estate, she said. Against the Whitmore property, yes. See, I want to be clear that I take no pleasure in this. See, if you and I can come to a private arrangement, some kind of structured agreement. He paused, and here was the real sentence underneath all the other sentences. See, it would be much simpler than a formal county process. See, for everyone. Clara looked at him for a long moment. See, she thought about how to answer. She had planned several versions of this conversation on the 12-mile ride back from Silas's ranch, and she had decided then that she would not let him see anything she held. See, she would not be angry. She would not be frightened. See, she would not give him any emotional information he could use to calibrate his next move. See, I'll need to review the account records, she said. See, I don't make financial decisions without documentation. See, of course, he said, smooth, satisfied. He thought she was buying time while she panicked. See, I can have my records ready at any time. Good, I'll be in touch. She picked her scissors back up. See, was there anything else? He looked at her. For just a fraction of a second, something moved through his expression that wasn't the controlled performance, something that looked almost like uncertainty. See, like he was trying to read her and finding the text harder than expected. See, I'm trying to resolve this fairly, he said. I know exactly what you're trying to do, Clara said, and went back to the seam she was working on. See, he left. She kept her eyes on the fabric and her hands moving until she was certain she heard his boots off the porch and onto the street. See, then she set the scissors down and pressed both hands flat on the workbench and looked at the wall and did not shake, because she had decided in advance that she was not going to shake. See, she mostly succeeded. He had come to her exactly as Silas had said he would. See, with the smile and the regret and the private arrangement underneath which was the same document he'd produced at the altar, repackaged with different words. See, give me something over your land, and I'll make this easier. See, don't, and I'll make it formal and public and complicated, and you'll be negotiating a railroad deal with a legal claim sitting on your property like a stone wall. See, he thought she was still the woman from September. See, still standing at the altar, still absorbing the blow, still trying to figure out what had happened. See, he did not know about the inquiry record. He did not know she had been to the bank. See, he did not know about Ruth or Thomas Birch, or the fact that she had spent the last 3 months building exactly the kind of documentation that her father had always built piece by piece, receipt by receipt. See, signed and dated and stored where it could be found. See, he did not know what she was holding. She went back to work. See, she had 6 days before the end of the month, and she intended to use every one of them. See, the bank record arrived on a Friday morning. See, Collier's clerk delivered it personally, which told Clara that Collier had decided the matter was important enough to warrant something beyond routine postal handling, or that he was curious, which was equally likely. See, the clerk was a young man named Henry, who handed her the envelope with the careful seriousness of someone who knew he was carrying something significant without knowing what. See, she thanked him and closed the shop door and stood at her workbench and opened the envelope alone. See, the record covered 3 years of her father's account: 1,886, 1,887, 1,888. See, the bank had organized it chronologically, each transaction listed with the date, the amount, and the payee. See, Clara ran her finger down the columns slowly, not rushing, the way you read something when you need to understand it completely rather than just extract the answer from it. See, she found what she was looking for on the 14th line of the 1,887 records. See, a bank draft. September 14th, 1,887. Pay, Rourke Mercantile. See, amount $47.30. She stared at that line for a long time. See, $47.30. The account had been $42 when opened. See, which meant her father had paid the original balance, plus what he appeared to be a carrying fee, which meant he had not only settled the account but had paid it with the additional cost already included. See, he had squared it completely, and he had done it through the bank, which meant there was a record on both sides, the outgoing draft from her father's account, and, somewhere in Edwin's own ledger, the incoming payment. See, Edwin had that record too. He had to. You couldn't run a mercantile without tracking incoming payments. See, which meant he had known, when he built his $900 claim, that the account had been settled. See, he had built the claim anyway.
Yeah.
He had walked into her shop with his careful regret and his private arrangement and his $912, knowing the foundational number beneath it had already been paid. See, that wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a misunderstanding of old records. See, that was fraud, deliberate, constructed, and documented from his own side as well as hers. See, Clara set the bank record on the workbench beside the inquiry record and looked at them together for a moment. See, then she went to find Thomas Birch. The land office was quiet on Friday mornings. See, Thomas was at his desk with a ledger open, and his reading spectacles pushed up on his forehead in the way he wore them when he wasn't actually reading, just thinking. See, he looked up when Clara came in. "Has anything been filed against the Whitmore property?" she asked. See, Thomas pulled his spectacles down and went to the filing cabinet with the particular efficiency of a man who knew exactly where everything was. See, he came back with a thin folder. "Filed this morning," he said. See, came in before I opened, must have been slipped under the door overnight. He spread the papers on the counter. See, Edwin Rourke, claimant. Estate of Hiram Whitmore, respondent. See, alleging outstanding commercial debts totaling $912. See, medical supplies, household goods, fabric and material purchases from Rourke Mercantile. Years 1,886 through 1,888. See, Clara looked at the filing. It was neat and professionally prepared, not something Edwin had written himself. See, someone with legal training had organized this. The numbers were itemized in a way that looked thorough, legitimate, the kind of document that carried weight by virtue of its own formatting. See, when is the hearing? She asked. County hearings run the last Thursday of each month, Thomas said. See, that's 11 days from today. 11 days. She had 11 days to build the counter-argument that would take this apart in front of the county official completely enough that Edwin couldn't reassemble it. See, she looked at the itemized list again. The $42 account was in there, inflated, as she'd expected, with interest and fees that had been added without any original agreement authorizing them. See, but there were other items too. A medicine purchase she didn't recognize laudanum, listed at $18 for a quantity that seemed excessive. See, blanket fabric she couldn't immediately trace. A lumber delivery listed at $60 for materials she had no memory of. See, some of it was the original account inflated, but some of it was invented. See, new line items added to legitimate history to make the total reach $900 rather than the inflated $40 or $50 a careful judge of the original account might accept. See, he had been building this for a while. This was not something constructed in the weeks since their confrontation in the shop. See, the detail was too specific, the fabrications too well distributed among the real items to have been assembled quickly. See, he had been preparing this since before the wedding. See, she thought about that on the walk back to the shop. See, he had been building both approaches simultaneously, the marriage and the legal claim, so that whichever one she prevented, the other would still be positioned and ready. See, he had planned for her to refuse, which meant he had never actually expected her to say yes to the wedding, or had at minimum prepared for the possibility. See, the marriage had been the preferred route, cleaner, faster, gave him direct control. See, the legal claim was the backup. She had defeated the first move and walked directly into the second, exactly as he had intended. See, she sat with that knowledge for a few minutes and let it be as ugly as it was. See, then she started working. She had 11 days, and she had a bank record, and she had an inquiry filing from February, and she had 6 years of her father's meticulous paperwork. See, she had Ruth, who was willing to make up for lost time. See, she had Thomas Birch, who would confirm whatever appeared in the county records. See, and she had something else, something she hadn't fully accounted for. Until now, she had the itemized list of Edwin's claim, which contained items she could prove were false. See, the lumber delivery listed at $60 was traceable. See, lumber came with delivery manifests, especially for significant amounts. See, if that delivery had genuinely been made to the Whitmore property, there would be a record from the lumber yard, a hauling record, a signature on delivery. See, if there was no such record, the item was invented, and an invented item in a legal claim was not a civil dispute. See, it was fraud, criminal fraud, and fraud of that nature, if proven in a county hearing, did not just defeat the claim. See, it ended the claimant. She needed to move fast, and she needed to move without Edwin knowing how much she had. See, she started with the lumber. The yard on the East Road was run by a man named Pete Garver, who had a phenomenal memory for deliveries because he had once been cheated on a large order and had never stopped being angry about it. See, which meant he tracked every movement of wood that came through his yard with the obsessive record-keeping of a man with a grudge against imprecision. See, Clara had repaired his wife's winter coat 2 years ago, and they were on friendly terms. See, she explained what she needed. Any record of a lumber delivery to the Whitmore property in 1886, 1887, or 1888. See, Pete Garver pulled his ledgers without being asked twice. See, 45 minutes later, Clara had her answer. There was no lumber delivery to the Whitmore property in any of those 3 years. See, not from Garver's yard, and Garver was the only yard within reasonable hauling distance. See, if her father had ordered $60 of lumber and had it delivered, it would have come from Garver. See, there was no record because there was no delivery, because the delivery had not happened. See, can I get a written statement from you, she asked. See, that your records show no such delivery. Pete Garver looked at her with the expression of a man being given permission to be specifically useful in a way that appeals to him. See, you're fighting Rourke, he said. I'm correcting a false claim, she said. See, same thing, sounds like. He pulled out a piece of paper. See, I'll write it now. Give me 5 minutes. She left with the statement in her coat pocket and went directly to the apothecary on the south end of Main Street. See, the laudanum listing $18 for a quantity that struck her as wrong needed to be checked against what had actually been prescribed and dispensed during her mother's illness. See, the apothecary, a careful man named Dr. Bauer, who had treated her mother in the final year, kept dispensing records as a matter of medical practice. See, he was in when she arrived, and he listened to her explanation with the focus of someone who took the accuracy of medical records personally. See, I remember your mother's case, he said. She was a patient of mine for 14 months. See, I can tell you exactly what I dispensed and what she was prescribed. He went to his records. See, laudanum was used, yes, but the quantities were modest. Your mother's illness was primarily respiratory, and she managed her discomfort carefully. See, she didn't like taking it more than necessary. He found the record. See, the total dispensed over the 14 months was consistent with $2.50 of cost. See, not 18. And would Rourke's store have supplied laudanum separately from your dispensary? See, Dr. Bauer looked at her over his spectacles. Not to my patients, Miss Whitmore. See, I kept close control of what my patients were taking. See, if someone had been supplying your mother laudanum through a general store, I would have known about it and I would not have permitted it. See, he said it with the particular firmness of a man whose professional authority had just been implicitly challenged and who wanted that noted. See, I need a statement from you as well, she said. He wrote it without being asked a second time. See, she was back at the shop by 4 in the afternoon with 2 statements in her pocket and the bank record on her workbench and 8 days remaining. See, she sat down and made a list the organized, numbered kind her father had always made when he was preparing to argue something of every element of Edwin's claim, what evidence she had against each piece, and what she still needed. See, the original account, covered by the bank draft record. See, settled in full, September 1887. The lumber delivery, no record at the only viable yard. See, covered by Garver's statement. The laudanum, excessive quantity not consistent with medical records. See, covered by Dr. Bauer's statement. Remaining items she hadn't yet verified. Blanket fabric, listed at $22. See, a tool and hardware purchase, listed at $15.40. See, a general supplies line item at $38 that was vague enough to be almost anything. See, she needed those 3. She had 7 days. Ruth came to the shop the next morning before Clara opened, which meant Ruth had walked across town at 7 in the December cold with purpose, which meant something had happened. See, Frank Tillis came to the house last night, Ruth said, unwinding her scarf with hands that were colder than she'd let them get if she'd been paying attention. See, he wanted to speak to Harold about something at the store. See, I brought coffee and I listened. Clara put the kettle on and waited. See, Edwin is worried, Ruth said. He's not panicking. See, but Frank said Edwin has been in the back office every evening this week, going through his old ledgers. See, looking for something. Or checking something. She wrapped her hands around the mug Clara handed her. See, Frank thinks he's making sure his records are in order before the hearing. See, he's looking for the draft payment, Clara said. He knows it exists. See, he has to. It came through his account. He's trying to figure out if I've found it. See, Ruth stared at her. You found it. My father paid the account in full in September of 1887. See, bank draft, documented on both sides. Clara picked up the bank record and held it out. See, Ruth looked at it without touching it, the way people look at evidence in a courtroom carefully, with the particular attention of someone understanding its weight for the first time. See, he knew, Ruth said, when he walked into your shop and said $900. See, he knew the original account was paid. Yes, Ruth sat down on the stool near the workbench. See, she looked like someone who had spent the last 3 months feeling guilty and was now discovering that the thing she'd felt guilty about was even worse than she'd known, which is a specific and uncomfortable experience. See, what do you need from me, she said. The blanket fabric, Clara said. See, $22 listed in 1887. I need to know whether Rourke's store was even carrying the kind of blanket fabric that would run that price. See, if it was a standard item he stocked, I can't easily disprove the purchase without a corresponding receipt. See, but if it wasn't something he stocked, his store didn't carry specialty fabric in 87, Ruth said immediately. See, that was before he expanded the dry goods section. See, he added the fabric shelves in 88, I remember. Because Margaret Finch made a point of it, she'd been ordering fabric from Billings and suddenly didn't have to. She paused. See, in 1887, Edwin's store carried basic domestic goods. See, not specialty yardage. You're certain? I've been shopping in this town my whole life, Ruth said, with a firmness that had a slightly injured edge, the mild offense of someone whose domestic knowledge had been questioned. See, yes, I'm certain. Can you get anyone else to confirm it? Another woman who was shopping the store regularly in that period. See, Dorothy Marsh was in that store every week from here to Kingdom Come, Ruth said. See, she'll remember. Go see her today. I need a statement, even if it's just a written letter, saying what she remembers about the store's inventory in those years. See, Ruth left with the particular energy of a woman who had found the right way to be useful and was committed to it. See, Clara went back to her list. The hardware items she could check at Garver's. He'd sold hardware alongside lumber since his wife had pushed him to diversify, and he would have delivery records for that too. See, she went back that afternoon. Garver checked. No hardware delivery to the Whitmore property in 1886, 87, or 88. See, he added it to his statement without being asked. The general supplies line item was the hardest to disprove because it was deliberately vague. See, $38 for unspecified supplies was the kind of entry that could mean anything and was exactly the kind of thing a fraudulent claim put in to pad the total hard to directly disprove because, see, there was nothing specific enough to check against. See, she sat with that problem for 2 days. The answer came from an unexpected direction, the way answers sometimes did when you'd been working a problem long enough that your mind started solving it below the surface without telling you. See, she was hemming Frances Dell's grandmother's dress on a Tuesday afternoon 9 days in, 2 days before the hearing when Frances said something offhand about her own grandmother keeping a household diary. See, Clara stopped hemming. Her mother had kept a household diary. See, not every year she'd been inconsistent about it, the way busy people were inconsistent about anything that wasn't immediately necessary. See, but during the illness years, she had kept one. Clara had found it in the trunk in the back room and set it aside because reading her mother's handwriting during that period had felt like more than she could manage, while also doing everything else. See, she finished Frances's fitting, sent the girl home with her grandmother's dress properly adjusted and the promise to have it done by Friday, and went directly to the trunk. See, the diary was a small leather-covered book, the kind sold by the stationers for household accounts and personal notes, half the pages used. See, her mother's handwriting was smaller and more crowded in these pages than in the household ledger, the writing of a woman doing it when she had the energy, not the writing of a routine. See, Clara read it standing up, because sitting down felt too much like settling in, and she didn't know yet what she was going to find, and she needed to be able to stop. See, her mother wrote about the illness the way practical women wrote about hard things directly, with little self-pity and with specific attention to costs and resources, because the money question never stopped being relevant even when you were dying. See, she wrote about Dr. Bauer and what he prescribed. She wrote about what Hiram was managing on the land. See, she wrote about Clara, who had been 21 and 22 during those years, old enough to be helpful and young enough that her mother worried about what she was carrying. See, and she wrote about the store accounts. November 1887, Hiram settled the Rourke account in full. See, he was pleased about it, said he doesn't like carrying debt to merchants, and this one had worried him. See, I told him the receipt was in the satchel where it belonged. See, Clara read that sentence 3 times. The receipt was in the satchel where it belonged. See, she had gone through the leather satchel in the first night of searching. See, she had found bank records, land documents, her grandfather's papers. See, she had not found the Rourke mercantile receipt. She had assumed it was missing, lost, misfiled, fallen out during one of the moves between rooms. See, she went to the back room and got the satchel and opened it again on the workbench and went through it completely. Every piece of paper, every folded document, every item she had looked at 3 months ago and set aside. See, halfway through the stack, folded inside a land registration document from 884, where it had no businesses being and where she had clearly looked at it 3 months ago and failed to register what it was because her eyes had been moving fast, and her. See, mind had been elsewhere, was a small piece of paper. See, Rourke Mercantile. Account settled. Amount received $47.30. See, date, September 16. See, 1,000. See, 887. See, signature Edwin H. Rourke. See, his own signature, on a receipt proving the account had been closed. See, 2 days after the bank draft had cleared, she stood at her workbench and held the paper and looked at his handwriting on it and felt something move through her that she did not have a precise name for. See, not triumph that wasn't quite it yet. More like the particular sensation of a lock opening after you've been working at it for a very long time. See, he had signed this himself. He had written the words account settled in his own hand, and she had been holding it for 3 months without knowing it. See, she set it on the workbench beside the bank draft record and looked at them side by side. See, 2 documents. The outgoing payment and the incoming acknowledgement, both dated within 48 hours of each other in September of 1887, both completely corroborating each other. See, both entirely destroying the foundational premise of his $900 claim. See, she took a breath. Then she sat down and began organizing everything into the order she would present it. See, she had the bank draft. She had the signed receipt. See, she had Garver's statement on the lumber and the hardware. See, she had Dr. Bauer's statement on the laudanum quantities. See, she had what Ruth would bring her from Dorothy Marsh about the fabric inventory. See, which Ruth delivered the following morning in the form of a letter written in Dorothy's slightly shaky but entirely legible hand, stating clearly that Edwin Rourke's store did not carry specialty blanket fabric in 1000, see, 887, and that she had personal. See, knowledge of this having shopped there consistently through that entire period. See, she also had the inquiry record from February, the one showing Edwin had been investigating her property before the engagement had moved into its serious phase. See, that last piece was not about the financial claim specifically. See, it was about pattern. It was about the picture of a man who had been systematically, deliberately building a case against a woman while simultaneously pretending to want to marry her. See, the county official could not necessarily rule on motive, but he could see it. See, a room could see it, and sometimes what a room saw was more consequential than what could be strictly proven. See, she organized everything into a single file in the order she would use it. See, she had done this before with the bank during the land dispute after her father's death, and she had learned then that the most important thing was not having the right documents, it was presenting them in the right sequence. See, you had to build the picture before you revealed it. See, you had to let the other person make their case completely and then show piece by piece where each piece was wrong. See, the night before the hearing, Silas came to the shop. See, she had not sent for him. See, he arrived at 6 in the evening with 2 covered dishes that his housekeeper had apparently sent a practical woman who understood that people preparing for important things often forgot to eat, and he set them on the small table without ceremony. See, they ate without discussing the hearing for the first several minutes. See, he asked about Frances Dell's dress. She told him it was done and delivered, and that Frances's grandmother's beadwork had been in better condition than expected. See, he said he'd seen Garver at the feed store, and that Garver seemed satisfied with himself. See, he should be, Clara said. His statement is one of the cleaner pieces of evidence I have. See, Silas refilled his coffee. How are you feeling about tomorrow? See, I'm not feeling anything about it, Clara said. I'm just going to present the documents in the right order. See, he looked at her with the particular expression she had learned to recognize over these months, the one that wasn't quite skeptical and wasn't quite amused, but sat in the space between them. See, you're feeling something about it. She looked back at him. See, I'm angry. She said, I've been angry for 3 months, and I've been using it carefully, and tomorrow I need to keep using it carefully and not let it get ahead of me. See, you will. You don't know that. See, you've been keeping it carefully for 3 months while rebuilding your business and fighting this case without any help you didn't actively choose, he said, in the same flat, matter-of-fact tone he used for everything. See, one more morning seems manageable. Clara looked at him for a moment. See, I found the receipt, she said. He waited. His signature. See, on a receipt proving the account was closed in 1887. See, I had it the whole time. It was in my father's satchel, folded inside the wrong document. She paused. See, I could have found it in the first week if I'd been more careful. See, you found it, he said. I should have found it sooner. See, Clara. He said her name in the same tone he'd used to point out a straightforward fact. See, you found it. That's what matters tomorrow, not when. See, she looked at the table. She knew he was right. She also knew that the knowledge that she'd been carrying the decisive evidence without knowing it for 3 months was going to sit with her for a long time, not as a wound exactly, see, but as a reminder of the cost of moving too fast through the things that mattered. See, will you come tomorrow, she asked. She hadn't planned to ask it. See, it came out before she'd decided to say it, which happened occasionally with things she'd been not quite deciding for a while. See, he looked at her. Do you want me to help? She said. See, not to speak. I'm not asking you to fight this. I know that. See, she stopped. She was not a woman who found it easy to say, I want someone beside me. See, she had spent 3 years building a version of herself that operated without needing to say it. See, I think it would be easier, she said finally, having someone there who already knows I can handle it. See, Silas nodded once. The small, almost imperceptible nod that was his most common way of agreeing to something. See, I'll be there, he said. She cleaned up after he left and set the file on the workbench where she'd see it first thing in the morning and went to bed. See, she did not sleep well, but she had not expected to, and she had stopped expecting things from herself that the circumstances didn't reasonably allow. See, in the morning she dressed carefully, see, braided her hair, see, put on her warmest practical coat, see, picked up the file, see, and walked to the county building. See, the hearing room was smaller than she'd imagined, a plain room with a long table, chairs along the wall, a raised desk at the front where the county official sat. See, his name was Alderman Cole, a man in his mid-50s with a reputation for careful, unhurried decisions that people either found reassuring or infuriating depending on how they felt about patients. See, Edwin was already there when Clara arrived, with a man she didn't recognize who was clearly the lawyer who had prepared the filing of Billings man from the look of his coat. See, Edwin looked up when she came in, and something moved through his expression that he controlled quickly. See, he had expected her to look nervous. She didn't particularly. See, there were perhaps 12 people in the room. Hearings like this were public, which Edwin had almost certainly counted on a public defeat or a public settlement. Either one served him. See, Ruth was there, in the back. Dorothy Marsh had apparently been brought in her niece's wagon and was sitting in the aisle chair with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who intended to be a witness to something important. See, Thomas Birch was there because county business was his business. See, and Silas was there, in a chair along the side wall, in his trail coat, watching the front of the room with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere, found a seat, and intends to stay. See, Clara sat down at the respondent's table and set her file in front of her and folded her hands on top of it and waited. See, Alderman Cole called the hearing to order. Edwin's lawyer presented the claim first. See, he was smooth and organized, and he laid out the $912 with the professional confidence of a man who had done this before and expected it to go the way it usually went. See, he itemized each element, cited the years, explained the carrying costs, and built a picture of a merchant who had extended generous credit to a struggling family during a difficult time and who had waited, see, patiently, for the estate to acknowledge what was owed. See, it was, Clara had to admit, a very good presentation of a completely false story. See, Alderman Cole listened without expression. Then he turned to Clara. See, Miss Whitmore, you're representing the Whitmore estate? See, I am, she said. You may respond. Clara opened her file and set the first document in front of her and began. See, she did not rush. She did not perform. She presented each piece the way her father had always told her to present anything important clearly, without embellishment, letting the facts do the work that facts were designed to do. See, she started with the bank draft, the outgoing payment from her father's account in September $1,887.47.30, payable to Rourke Mercantile. See, Edwin's lawyer looked at it without changing expression. See, Edwin looked at it and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. See, then she put down the signed receipt, Edwin Rourke's own handwriting. See, account settled, his signature the same date. The room was very quiet. See, she presented Garver's statement on the lumber, doctor. See, Bauer's statement on the laudanum. Dorothy Marsh's letter on the fabric inventory. See, the hardware records. And then, last, she placed the February inquiry record on the table. See, the land firm's filing, with Edwin's name as retaining party, dated 8 months before the wedding, 7 months before the engagement had turned serious. See, this is a county record, she said to Alderman Cole, showing that the claimant was directing commercial inquiry into the Whitmore property and its water access in February of this year. See, 7 months before he presented documents at our wedding ceremony, transferring control of that property to himself. See, 2 months before the engagement became formally serious. She paused. See, I present this not as evidence of financial fraud, but as evidence of pattern. See, the claimant has been attempting to gain control of this property through multiple mechanisms for the better part of a year. See, the financial claim before this hearing is the most recent mechanism. See, the account it is built upon was settled in full in September of 1887, as the documents show, with the claimant's own signature acknowledging receipt of payment. See, she closed the file. Alderman Cole looked at the documents for a long time. See, he looked at Edwin. He looked at the lawyer who was doing the controlled, professional version of a man staring at a floor that has just dropped out from under him. See, Mr. Rourke, Alderman Cole said. Edwin said something. See, Clara registered the shape of the words in an attempt to explain the documents, some framing about the receipt being superseded by later transactions, but she stopped listening to the content because she could hear from the tone that it was over. See, the room could hear it too. She could feel the shift in the air behind her, the collective understanding of 12 people watching a story they had believed for 3 months reveal itself as something entirely different. See, she looked at the documents in front of her. She thought about September. See, the dress, the altar, the 100 people who had watched Edwin walk away and had believed him because he was loud and confident, and she was just a woman standing there. See, she did not feel triumphant. Not yet. What she felt was something quieter and more durable than triumph, something that had to do with her father's careful handwriting on an old receipt and her mother's diary entry about the satchel, and, see, 11 days of work done without help she hadn't chosen. See, Alderman Cole called for a brief recess. He came back 14 minutes later, which Clara suspected was the minimum time required to maintain the appearance of careful deliberation when the outcome was no longer genuinely uncertain. See, the claim filed against the Whitmore estate is rejected, he said. See, the documentation presented by the respondent is sufficient to establish that the primary account cited in the claim settled in full in September of 1887. See, the additional items in the claim are not supported by delivery records or corroborating evidence. See, the claim is dismissed. He said a few other things. See, Clara wrote down the relevant ones. The room began to move around her, people standing, conversations starting, the particular noise of a hearing that had resolved more dramatically than most hearings resolved. See, Edwin left without speaking to her. She saw the back of his coat moving toward the door, and then he was gone. See, Ruth appeared at her elbow immediately, squeezing her arm without saying anything, which was exactly right. See, Dorothy Marsh said something sharp and satisfied from her chair that Clara caught only the last word of, but the tone was unambiguous. See, Thomas Birch nodded at her from across the room with the brief professional acknowledgement of a man whose faith in documentation had been confirmed. See, Silas was the last person she looked for. He was still in his chair along the side wall, watching her with the same steady, unhurried look he had been watching everything with all morning. See, when she met his eyes, he didn't smile, didn't gesture, didn't do any of the things people did when they wanted credit for having witnessed something. See, He simply nodded. The same small, nearly imperceptible nod he gave when something was as it should be. See, Clara picked up her file and held it against her chest and nodded back. See, outside, the December air was bitter cold and entirely still, the kind of cold that came with clear skies and made everything feel very sharp and very real. See, she stood on the county building steps for a moment before putting her coat on, and she let herself feel the cold completely, all of it, because it was hers. See, Edwin Rourke's claim was gone. Her land was clear. See, the creek was hers, and the woman who had built this case piece by piece, receipt by receipt, statement by statement, over 11 days with her own 2 hands, that woman was still standing on her own feet, on her own ground. See, and no amount of rewriting the story of the last 3 months would change that. See, she put her coat on and walked home. The day after the hearing, Clara slept until 7:30. See, this was not something she did. She was a 5:30 person by habit and necessity, had been since she was a child, when her father's morning routine pulled the whole household into motion before sunrise. See, sleeping past 6 felt like a failure of character. See, sleeping until 7:30 felt like something she would need to explain to someone, except there was no one to explain it to, and by the time she was fully awake, she had decided it didn't require explanation. See, she had spent 11 days running on 5 hours a night, and whatever Ruth's soup and Silas's housekeeper's cooking had put into her, and her body had apparently decided to collect what it was owed. See, she lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the house. See, wind against the north wall, which meant the temperature had dropped further overnight. See, the creak of the roof settling in the cold. Cottonwood Creek in the distance, lower than it would be in spring, but still moving, still making its particular sound that she had fallen asleep to for 23 years. See, she thought about the creek for the first time in weeks without also thinking about Edwin Rourke. See, that was new. She got up, started the stove, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window looking at the winter gray yard while it brewed. See, the land was frozen and quiet and entirely hers. The creek was frozen along its edges but still moving at the center, the way it always moved through December and January, stubborn, minimal, persistent. See, she had always liked that about it. She had not yet contacted the railroad company. See, this was deliberate. In the days leading up to the hearing, she had focused entirely on Edwin's claim, and in the immediate aftermath, she had allowed herself the rare luxury of not thinking about the next problem for approximately 18 hours. See, but the railroad situation hadn't resolved itself while she was sleeping until 7:30, and the surveyor, Aldous Webb, was presumably still in Red Willow or would be returning. See, and at some point she would need to have a conversation that involved significant money and legal complexity and decisions that would affect the property for the rest of her life. See, she poured the coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought about it seriously for the first time without the pressure of Edwin's claim sitting on top of everything. See, the railroad needed water access. She had water access. See, they were going to come to her, or she was going to go to them, and there would be a negotiation. See, the question was not whether the negotiation would happen, but what she wanted to walk away from it with. See, she thought about what her father had always said about selling anything. See, you had to know your floor before you walked in the room. See, not the number you hoped for, the number below, which nothing they offered was worth agreeing to. See, her floor wasn't a number exactly. It was a list of things she would not give up regardless of what they offered. See, the house. Cottonwood Creek itself, not the water rights in perpetuity, but the creek as a living part of her land. See, the eastern acreage, where the soil was best. The tailoring shop, which stood on the main parcel. See, what she could negotiate with was the western strip, a narrow band of land along the creek's near edge, that was functionally the least useful portion of the property and geographically exactly where a water station would need to be built. See, she could sell a strip and keep everything that mattered. See, the question was whether the railroad company would take a strip when they might want the whole western quarter. See, she was still working through this when she heard a knock at the door. See, it was Silas. He was holding his hat and looked like he had ridden in from the ranch that morning, which meant he had left early, which meant something had sent him. See, Webb came to see me yesterday afternoon, he said, when she'd let him in and put more coffee on. See, the surveyor. Clara looked at him. Why? He heard about the hearing. See, news like that moves. Silas sat at the kitchen table and set his hat on the chair beside him. See, he wanted to know the status of the Whitmore property. See, whether the ownership situation was, his word, stable. See, what did you tell him? That it was entirely stable and he should speak to you directly. Silas paused. See, I also told him that you had been managing this property alone for 3 years, that you understood the land better than anyone he was going to meet in this county. See, and that if he walked into that conversation thinking he was dealing with someone who didn't know what she had, he was going to waste both his time and yours. See, Clara looked at him over her coffee mug. I wasn't fighting your battle, he said, reading her expression. See, I was correcting his assumptions. There's a difference. See, she considered this. There was a difference. The first would have been presumptuous. See, the second was she thought about the word and settled on useful. See, practically, accurately useful, delivered without drama or the need for gratitude. See, when is he coming, she asked. He said he'd send a note. See, probably early this week. She nodded and looked out the window at the yard. See, the frozen ground, the fence line, the line of cottonwood trees along the creek that had been there since her childhood. See, she had a sudden, clear memory of her father standing almost exactly where she was standing now, looking at the same view, telling her that the land would outlast everything they worried about. See, he had been right about that. He had not been right about everything, but he had been right about that. See, I know what I want from the negotiation, she said. See, I figured you would. The western strip only, 30 feet wide along the creek edge, running from the county road to the property boundary. See, they can build their water station on it. They cannot touch the creek channel itself, the flow rights, or anything east of that strip. She paused. See, I wanted in the contract that the property remains agricultural in all other uses, and that the station doesn't put permanent structures that obstruct the eastern view from the house. See, Silas was quiet for a moment. The view clause is going to be a strange one for their lawyers. See, the view clause is non-negotiable, she said. My mother planted those cottonwoods so she could see them from the kitchen window. See, I'm not selling that. Something moved through Silas's expression that she had learned over the months of knowing him was the thing that happened on his face when he was moved by something and didn't particularly want to show it. See, he looked at the table for a moment. That's a strong position, he said. See, I know it's a strong position. I have something they need. She set down her coffee mug. See, Edwin spent 2 years trying to convince me I needed rescuing. See, I've spent 3 months proving I don't. I'm not going to walk into the most important negotiation of my life and act like I'm grateful they're interested. See, no, Silas said, you're not. Webb's note arrived Tuesday. See, he proposed a meeting at the county office on Thursday with a representative of the railroad company, present a man named Harlan Pruitt, who was traveling from the territorial capital. See, Clara wrote back confirming Thursday and spent Wednesday going through everything she knew about railroad right-of-way negotiations, which was not much, and everything she knew about water rights law, see, which was somewhat more because she had dealt with the downstream question with a neighboring ranch 2 years ago and had been thorough about it. See, she asked Thomas Birch what he knew about right-of-way agreements. See, Thomas knew quite a lot, as it happened, because the county had processed 2 of them in the past decade. See, he told her the key terms to watch for. The places companies typically tried to expand their claims through vague language. See, and the specific wording that would prevent the strip sale from being interpreted as a precedent for future acquisition of adjacent land. See, she wrote all of it down. She arrived at the Thursday meeting with her notes, her property documents, and the particular quality of attention she brought to anything she had prepared for carefully. See, Harlan Pruitt was a large man in his 50s with an expensive coat and the slightly distracted manner of someone who was used to being the most informed person in most rooms and found it occasionally tedious. See, he shook Clara's hand with the mild surprise some men produced when a woman arrived to negotiate rather than to agree to what had already been decided. See, he would get over that, Clara thought. Or he wouldn't, and they wouldn't reach an agreement, and the railroad would build its water station somewhere less convenient and more expensive, and she would keep her entire property intact. See, she could live with either outcome. That was the thing about knowing your floor. See, the meeting took 2 hours. Pruitt opened by describing the railroad's needs and the terms he typically offered for right-of-way acquisitions, which were straightforward and, in Clara's assessment, favorable to the company in ways that would compound over time if she accepted them without modification. She listened to all of it and wrote down the parts that required response. Then she presented her terms. Pruitt pushed back on the strip width. Immediately, he wanted 15 additional feet on the eastern side. Clara said no. He tried the view clause next, calling it unusual, which she had anticipated. She said unusual didn't mean unreasonable, and she wasn't removing it. He adjusted the offer amount upward, which she noted meant the initial offer had room that he'd been intending to give anyway, and she adjusted the strip terms accordingly. It was not comfortable. Pruitt was a professional negotiator, and he was good at his work, and there were 2 or 3 moments where Clara felt the pull of the easier yes, the one that resolved the discomfort and got everyone out of the room and left her with a number that, was still significant, even if it wasn't quite what she'd come in wanting. She felt that pull clearly each time, and each time she let it pass and went back to her notes and her floor. At the end of 2 hours, she had an agreement that gave the railroad a 32-foot strip along the Western Creek edge from the county road to the property's northern boundary. They could build the water station and the associated platform and access road within that strip. The creek channel itself remained entirely within the Whitmore property. No permanent structures over 8 feet could be built within 40 feet of the eastern edge of the strip. The price was $420, paid on signing of the final deed, and included a covenant that no additional Whitmore land could be acquired through the right-of-way agreement without a separate negotiation at current market value. Pruitt signed the preliminary agreement with the slightly compressed expression of a man who had gotten what he needed and was mildly irritated that it had cost him more than he'd planned. Clara signed it with her father's pen, which she had brought specifically for this purpose. Thomas Birch witnessed both signatures and filed the preliminary agreement in his impeccable records and said nothing beyond what was professionally required, though Clara noticed, on her way out, that his expression had the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who liked watching things resolve correctly. She walked out into the December afternoon with $420 promised on the deed and all of the land that mattered still entirely hers. She stood on the county building steps, the same steps, where she had stood 11 days ago after the hearing, and this time she allowed herself something she hadn't allowed then. She stood there in the cold for a full minute and felt it completely. Not triumph exactly. Something more complicated than triumph. Something that had grief mixed into it because her parents weren't alive to see this, and anger mixed into it because of the months it had taken to get here, and underneath both of those things a quiet, durable satisfaction that had nothing to do with Edwin or the railroad or any external confirmation at all. She had done this, all of it. She had built the tailoring business and managed the land and fought the claim and negotiated the deal, and none of it had required anyone to rescue her. The minute passed. She put her coat on and went back to work. The money changed things and didn't change things simultaneously, which was approximately what she'd expected. It paid the property taxes forward 3 years and restocked the secondary well equipment that had been failing since October and gave her enough cushion that she could take a week off if she wanted to without it being dangerous, which she wouldn't. Because she didn't know how to take a week off and suspected she would just use it to reorganize the shop, and that wasn't really a week off. What changed was subtler. The financial security gave her room to think forward instead of just managing what was immediately in front of her. See, she had been surviving carefully, stubbornly, without complaint for 3 years, and surviving was respectable and necessary. And it was also, she realized in the weeks after the railroad deal, exhausting in a way that was hard to fully feel while you were inside it. Like carrying something very heavy for so long that you stopped noticing the weight until you set it down and felt what your arms were actually like underneath. She wanted to expand the shop. The idea had been forming for months, half noticed, set aside whenever the immediate crisis required attention. But it was clear now, and she let herself think about it fully. She had more canvas work than she could comfortably handle alone. She had alternations and commissions backing up. Frances Dell had told 3 women about her grandmother's dress, and 2 of them had already come in asking about similar work. The demand was there. What she didn't have was time, and the only solution to that was help. There were women in Red Willow who needed work. She knew this the way you know the specific gravity of the town you grew up in, not from a list, but from a dozen small observations accumulated over years. The widow on the South Road, Vera Collins, who had been supporting 3 children since her husband died the previous spring by taking in laundry, which was brutal work that was destroying her hands. A young woman named May Sutton, who had come to Red Willow with a cousin's family and was doing unpaid household labor in exchange for her board, which was not an arrangement that served May Sutton and clearly served the cousin's household considerably more. And a woman named Agnes Fry, who was in her 40s and had been living on what her brother gave her since her own business, a small bakery, had failed 2 winters ago, and who was clearly waiting for something that would let her stop depending on her brother's charity, which the brother gave in the particular way some people gave charity, as though the recipient should feel its weight. Clara knew how to teach. Her mother had taught her, and her mother had been taught by her own mother, and the skills were transferable to anyone with patience and decent hands, and the willingness to be corrected without taking it personally. She went to see Vera Collins first, because Vera's need was most urgent, and because Vera had good hands. Clara had watched her fold laundry in the churchyard once, and noticed how she worked without looking, steady and sure. She offered Vera 3 days a week to start. Fair wages, not charity. Learning to work the canvas jobs first, which were less delicate than garment work and easier to correct mistakes on. The possibility of more hours as the work expanded. Vera looked at her for a long moment across the table where 3 children's shoes were lined up waiting to be resoled. Why me? Vera asked. Because you have good hands and you need steadier work than laundry, Clara said. And because I need someone I don't have to spend 6 months convincing to show up. Vera said yes. She started the following Monday and was competent within a week and excellent within a month, which was roughly what Clara had expected. May Sutton was harder. May was 20, cautious in the way of someone who had been told her judgment was wrong. So many times she no longer trusted it, and she asked 4 times whether the cousin's family needed to agree before she could take the position. Clara said that May was 20 years old and did not require her cousin's permission to accept employment. May stared at her as though this were a novel concept. She started 2 weeks after Vera. Agnes Fry came on her own. She heard through Dorothy Marsh, who was apparently a more effective information network than anything else operating in Red Willow, that Clara was hiring. And she appeared at the shop on a Wednesday morning and said flatly that she had been doing nothing useful for 2 years, and she needed to change that before she lost her mind entirely. Clara hired her the same day. Agnes turned out to have an instinct for garment structure that didn't need to be taught so much as pointed in the right direction, which made her the fastest learner of the 3. By the time January was fully underway. The shop had 4 people in it on the busy days, and the canvas work was caught up, and there were 3 garment commissions on the board, and the noise level was considerably higher than Clara had ever maintained. and she was adjusting to that with some difficulty and also with something she could only describe as a kind of fullness. See, a rightness. Ruth came in on a Tuesday and looked at the shop and looked at Clara and then looked at her lap for a moment in the way she looked at her lap when she was managing something. See, I should have been here months ago, Ruth said. You're here now, Clara said. See, that's forgiving me, not entirely, Clara said. See, but it's a start. Sit down. I need someone to hem these curtains, and your stitches are better than May's right now. See, Ruth sat down and picked up the curtains, and they worked side by side for 2 hours, without addressing the 6 years of friendship that had briefly failed, and then slowly, imperfectly resumed. See, which was exactly how Ruth and Clara had always handled the things that were too important to be fixed by talking about them. See, Edwin's situation resolved itself in stages, the way things dissolved when the energy that had been holding them together was removed. See, the hearing had been public. The documents Clara had presented were county records. See, the inquiry record from February was county record. See, the signed receipt with Edwin's handwriting and the bank draft that matched it were, within 48 hours of the hearing, the primary topic of conversation in Red Willow. See, because Thomas Birch was not a gossip, but he was a county official, and county records were public, and the people of Red Willow were entirely capable of doing their own reading. See, what they read was, a man had accused a woman of financial deception while concealing his own. See, a man had spent 2 years cultivating a woman's trust while simultaneously planning to use her land for profit. See, a man had filed a fraudulent claim and been defeated by the woman's own documentation, her dead father's bank records, her dead mother's receipts, the ordinary careful paperwork of a family that had done nothing wrong. See, the first person to apologize to Clara directly was Helen Pratt, who arrived at the shop with a fabric order and looked like she had been building up to the conversation for several days and was relieved to be through it. See, I should not have assumed, Helen said. No, Clara agreed. See, you should not have. Helen placed her order and paid the deposit and left. See, there was no further discussion of September. See, Clara made the coat she was hired to make and made it well, which was not forgiveness and not bitterness, but just the ordinary work of a woman who did what she was paid to do, regardless of what the customer had done previously. See, others came, some with orders, some with direct apologies, some with the slightly sideways manner of people who were not going to address what had happened directly, but wanted Clara to understand. See, through the normalcy of their business, that they were adjusting their position. See, Clara accepted all of it with the same equanimity, not warm, not cold. See, professional, present. Edwin's store began losing customers in the slow, inexorable way that reputation damage worked in small towns, not a rush, not a boycott. See, just a gradual drift of people finding reasons to order from the supplier in Harlan, or the traveling dry goods wagon, or anywhere that didn't carry the particular weight of what the Rourke Mercantile had become associated with. See, by February, Edwin had let his clerk go. By March, he had a sign in the window offering a significant portion of his stock at reduced prices. See, Clara heard this from Ruth and felt nothing in particular about it. See, not satisfaction, not sympathy, just the neutral acknowledgement of a fact that didn't require her emotional participation. See, he was gone by April. She heard he had sold the building and moved to Billings, which was large enough that he could start over with people who didn't know the story. See, she did not know if that was true and did not seek to find out. See, the thing she thought about when she thought about Edwin Rourke, which was less and less often as the year moved forward, was not the wedding or the claim or the documents. See, it was a smaller thing. It was the 2 years of patient, calculated performance. See, the choosing of the right words in the right moments. See, the way he had made her feel that her independence was something he respected while spending every private hour finding ways to neutralize it. See, she thought about it not because she was still angry, though she was sometimes still angry. See, she thought about it because it had taught her something about the difference between a person who found your strength admirable and a person who found your strength convenient to manage. See, Edwin had never been frightened by who she was. He had simply been planning around it. See, that distinction, the difference between a man who valued her capability and a man who worked to contain it, was something she had needed to understand, and had now understood in the most expensive possible way, and she did not intend to forget it. See, she was thinking about this distinction on a late February afternoon, working alone in the shop after Vera and May and Agnes had gone home when Silas came in. See, this was not unusual. He came in every 2 weeks or so less for repair work now, since the ranch's accumulation of broken things had reached a reasonable equilibrium, and more in the way that people returned to places where they felt comfortable. See, he brought his own coffee, which had become a habit that neither of them had formally acknowledged, and he sat at the small table and they talked about the canvas work and the railroad progress. See, which had moved into the preliminary building stage, and occasionally about other things. See, Clara had been watching what happened between them for months, with the same careful attention she gave to anything she didn't yet fully understand. See, she was not a romantic person. See, she had been romantic once, in the specific way of thinking you recognize love when it arrived, looking like what you expected love to look like, and that had ended in a September church with 100 witnesses and a man walking away. See, she was not going to be romantic in that way again. See, but she was honest, and honesty required her to acknowledge what was in the room when Silas was in it. See, the ease of it, the quality of the silence when neither of them was speaking, which was a specific and underrated thing, a silence you could inhabit without working to fill it. See, the way he argued with her when he disagreed, and stopped arguing when she made a better point, which was more than she could say for most of the men she'd encountered in any professional or personal context. See, the way he had sat in a chair along the wall of a county hearing room and watched her dismantle a fraudulent claim with 12 people watching and had not once looked like he was about to intervene. See, she thought about that specifically, the sitting still while she worked. See, the trust embedded in that stillness. "Can I ask you something?" she said on the February afternoon, setting down the seam she was working on. See, he looked up from his coffee. "All right, why did you come back? The second time with the repairs." See, after the wedding. She paused. "You could have sent your hand to town with the things." See, you didn't need to come yourself. Silas was quiet for a moment. See, he looked at his coffee, then at the window, then at her. See, he had the look of a man deciding how honest to be, which she recognized because she had worn the same look herself on various occasions. See, "Because I wanted to see if you were managing," he said. See, that's charity. No, he shook his head once. Charity is when you want to give someone what they need because it makes you feel good to give it. See, I wanted to see if you were managing because I was concerned about you. See, that's different. He paused, and the things genuinely needed repair. See, the vest didn't, she said, a brief pause. No, he admitted. See, the vest was bought wrong to begin with. Clara looked at him. See, you knew that when you brought it in. I did. She considered this for a moment. See, she had suspected it for months and had chosen not to say anything, and now she had said it and he had confirmed it. And the honesty of it, the small, quiet admission, landed somewhere it hadn't expected to land. See, I'm not good at being helped, she said. I know that about myself. See, I know you know it, he said. I haven't tried to help you. See, not in any way you didn't specifically ask for, the vest. See, the vest I regret, he said, and there was a dryness in it that was as close to humor as he got, which she had come to appreciate more than she would have predicted. See, she looked at him for a moment. What do you want, Silas? See, he met her eyes. I want to court you, he said. I've wanted to since about November, but I didn't think the timing was right. And then the hearing happened, and the timing still wasn't right. See, and now the railroad deal is settled and the shop is running, and you seem to have gotten to a place where things are not easy, but stable. See, so I'm telling you now, the directness of it was characteristic. See, no elaborate framing, no worked-up declaration, just the plain statement of what he wanted and the reasoning behind the timing. See, she thought about Edwin's proposals, which had been carefully romantic in the specific way of things constructed to produce a particular response. See, she thought about how different this was from that. See, I have some conditions, she said. He nodded, once as though this were entirely expected. See, the business stays mine, she said. The land stays mine. See, I don't want advice on how I run either unless I ask for it. See, I don't want you to feel that providing for me is something you're responsible for doing because I've been providing for myself for 3 years and I'm not going to stop. She paused. See, and I don't want you to be patient with me because you think patience is what I need. See, I want you to tell me when you disagree with me and argue it properly and let me do the same to you. See, we already do that last one, he said. I know. I'm putting it in writing. See, there's no paper involved. Metaphorically in writing, she said. See, something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, he didn't smile easily, which she had learned to interpret as meaning that when he did, it was real. See, this was the shift before the smile, the thing that happened on his face when he was genuinely amused rather than professionally polite. See, all right, he said. I agree to all of it. Good, she said. See, then yes, you can court me. She picked up the seam she'd been working on and went back to it, and Silas finished his coffee and sat at the table for a while longer, without either of them making much of what had just happened. See, because it was between them and it was real, and that was enough. See, they courted slowly through the winter and into spring. See, he came to dinner twice a week, which became 3 times without anyone deciding that it had. See, they walked along the creek on the clearer afternoons, and she showed him the places where her father had taught her to read the water level by the marks on the stones. See, and he showed her a problem with the fence line on the property's northern edge that she hadn't noticed, and they disagreed about the best solution, and she was right, and he acknowledged it without making it into a larger event than it was. See, they argued about her pricing again. He was still of the view that the canvas rate was too low. See, she was still of the view that he could manage his own business's numbers. See, he said this wasn't about opinion and was arithmetic. See, she raised the rate by 10 cents. Neither of them mentioned it afterward. See, he read in the evenings and she sewed, and they sat in the same room, doing these things in a silence that was the most comfortable silence she had experienced with another person since her mother had been alive. See, which she did not say out loud, because some things were too large and too private to say out loud, and he seemed to understand that without being told. See, she was not foolish about it. She had been foolish once, and it had cost her significantly. See, she watched him carefully the way you watch anything you're trusting with something important, and what she saw was consistent. See, he was the same in private as in public, which was not as common as it should have been. See, he was honest about the things he didn't know, which was rarer. See, he had opinions that were wrong sometimes, and he revised them when shown evidence, which she found more valuable than any amount of being right. See, he did not try to manage her, not once. Not when she made the decision about Agnes Fry's wages, which were higher than he might have set them. See, not when she turned down a second railroad inquiry about an additional strip of land, which she turned down because the second strip touched the creek channel and she had drawn that line clearly, and she held it. See, not when she told him in March that she was thinking about adding a second small building to the property for the expanding tailoring work and wanted to put it between the shop and the house, not behind the house. See, he said it would block the north wind from the shop porch in winter, which was worth considering. See, she said she had considered it, and she was willing to trade the wind block for the layout. See, he said all right and dropped it. That was the thing, she thought. See, he dropped things. He said his piece, clearly once, and then he let her decide and he dropped it. See, she had not known, until she experienced the contrast, how much of her energy in the years before had gone toward managing the slow, persistent pressure of people who didn't drop things. See, who came back to the same argument in different clothes. See, who treated her decisions as negotiations that hadn't finished yet. See, Silas treated her decisions as decisions. It seemed simple. See, it turned out to be the most significant quality she had encountered in another person. See, on a clear evening, when the cottonwoods were running their new leaves, and the creek was up from the snowmelt, and the construction of the railroad water station had begun on the western strip with a reassuring degree of staying exactly where she had. Specified it should stay, Silas asked her to marry him. He did it on her porch, which was where they had been sitting after dinner, and he did it without jewelry or elaborate preparation, because neither of those things was particularly him. And what he said was specific and plain and exactly what he meant. I'm not going to tell you I want to take care of you, he said. I know what you think of that, and I agree with you. I'm not going to tell you you'll have a better life, because I think you've built a good one without my help, and I'm not foolish enough to claim otherwise. He held her gaze in the straightforward way he did everything. I'm asking you because I want to share this life with you. Not own it, not manage it, share it. He paused, that's all. Clara looked at him in the evening light, with the creek sound behind them, and the smell of new leaves, and the distant sound of the construction on the western strip that had once been Edwin Rourke's intended route to her property, and was now simply, a railroad water station on a strip of land she had sold at terms she had negotiated herself. She thought about the woman who had stood at an altar in September. She thought about the dress she had taken apart and turned into useful things. She thought about 11 days, and a bank record, and her father's handwriting on an old satchel document, and 3 women who had needed work and found it, and were now building something of their own inside what she had built. She thought about what it meant to choose something freely, with complete knowledge, without need or desperation, driving the choice just the clear, considered recognition of what was good and true and worth saying yes to. Yes, she said. All right. They were married in June in the same church where Edwin Rourke had walked away from her 9 months before. Clara had thought about whether to use a different venue and had decided against it. The church had not done anything wrong. It was a building. She was not going to let the memory of one bad morning take a building away from her. She would replace the memory with a better one, and eventually the better one would be the one that came to mind first, and the other would recede to where it belonged, back into the past, where things that were over went. She made her own dress, not white blue-gray, the color of the creek in early morning, practical enough to wear again and well made enough to last. She braided her hair herself and put on the good boots and walked into the church with its own steps. And Silas was at the front, and the same people who had watched Edwin leave were watching now, which she had considered and decided to accept without bitterness. People were imperfect and inconsistent, and they came to weddings, and they gossiped, and they apologized, and they kept going, and so did she. Ruth was there. Dorothy Marsh was there in her aisle chair, refusing to sit in the pews on the grounds that she was 81 and entitled to the aisle chair. Vera Collins was there, and May Sutton, and Agnes Fry, who wore the coat she'd been making for herself in her spare moments since January, and had finally finished in April, and which was excellent. Pete Garver was there. Thomas Birch was there, even Doctor. Bauer was there, which surprised her a little. The ceremony was short because neither Clara nor Silas was the type for long ceremonies. The minister asked the relevant questions. They answered them. Silas looked at her the way he looked at things he was serious about directly, without performance, with the particular steadiness that she had decided, somewhere in the fall, was the most valuable thing she had ever encountered in another person. When it was done, they walked out into the June morning, and the cottonwoods along the creek were in full leaf, and the construction on the western strip had been finished the previous week, and Cottonwood Creek ran through her land exactly as. It always had. Indifferent. Persistent. She stood outside the church with her husband beside her and felt the specific quality of a day, when the present moment and the right moment happened to coincide, which was rare enough to notice. Vera Collins said afterward that what she remembered most from the wedding was not the ceremony, but the way Clara had looked coming down the steps. Not like a rescued woman, not like a woman who had finally achieved something. like a woman who had somewhere to be and was going there. See, which was accurate. Clara had always had somewhere to be. See, the difference now was that someone was walking alongside her, and she had chosen him, fully and without fear, which was the only way she had ever wanted to choose anything. See, the years that followed were not simple. See, the tailoring business grew in the complicated, imperfect way that real growth happened 2 good months and then a difficult month, and then the learning that came from the difficult month and the adjustments you made because of it. See, Vera Collins became the most reliable employee Clara had ever had, and May Sutton developed an unexpected talent for the more complicated commission work, and Agnes Fry eventually hired her own assistant, see, which Clara took as the particular compliment it was. See, the railroad changed Red Willow. See, slowly, then more noticeably, the town became a stop on a real route, and the economics of it shifted, and some things improved, and some familiar things were lost, which was what happened when things changed significantly. See, and Clara thought her mother would have had opinions about all of it, and she wished, as she wished regularly, that she could hear those opinions. See, Silas's operation expanded the year after the wedding. See, he bought the adjacent property when the previous owner retired, added cattle, hired 2 more permanent hands. See, he and Clara managed their 2 operations as separate concerns, which had been her condition, and it turned out to be exactly the right arrangement, because they were better at sharing a life than sharing a business, and they both knew it. See, they argued regularly about money, about the second building on the property, about a particular fence dispute with a neighboring claim that went on for 6 months and got ridiculous before it resolved. See, Clara was usually right about things involving the property and the business. See, Silas was usually right about things involving other people, which she found mildly irritating and told him so. See, he never tried to make her smaller. She never tried to make him into something he wasn't. See, they were imperfect together in the ordinary way of 2 people who brought their full selves into the same space and had to negotiate that constantly, and neither of them would have changed it. See, years later, when people in Red Willow told the story, and people did tell it, see, the way they told any story that had enough drama and reversal to be worth retelling, they usually told it as the story of Silas Crowley standing up in the back pew while everyone else stayed seated. See, it was a good detail. Clara did not dispute it, but what she knew from the inside of the story was something different. See, what she knew was that Silas had stood up and offered his coat and a ride home, and then consistently, for every month that followed, had done the most difficult thing available to him. See, he had trusted her to handle it, not because he didn't care. See, because he did, and he understood the difference between caring about someone and managing them, and he chose the harder thing every time. See, the greatest thing Edwin Rourke had ever done for Clara Whitmore was show her, in September of 1889, exactly what it looked like when a man wanted to own a woman's life instead of share it. See, she had not enjoyed learning that lesson. She would not have chosen to learn it the way she learned it. See, but she knew it now. She knew it in the bone-deep way you know things that cost you something to learn. See, and because she knew it, when the real thing arrived plain and steady and entirely without performance, she recognized it. See, that was what she had won. Not the land, though the land was hers. See, not the hearing, though she had won it completely. See, not even the railroad deal, though she had negotiated it well. See, what she had won was the certainty that she could trust her own eyes. See, that she knew the difference between what she needed and what someone wanted her to believe she needed. See, that the life she had built belonged to her entirely, and any addition to it would be chosen rather than accepted. See, she had stood at one altar in a dress that was taken apart and turned into something useful. See, she had stood at another in a dress she made with full knowledge of what she was walking toward. See, the distance between those 2 mornings was 9 months, and everything she had learned in them. She had walked every step of it herself.